Welcome back to Dark Horror Narrations, everybody. Get comfy, turn your lights down low, headphones if you got them. You don't have to make it to the end. The stories are designed to fall asleep to, ergo the reason all the timestamps. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell notification, drop a comment, let me know where you're from, which story was your favorite, and share it with someone else who loves dark horror stories. A side note, I'm also on Spotify too. Search Dark Horror Narrations, same name, same channel, vibe, things like that. Same stories, just another way to listen to it. As well, the merchandise store is now officially live, darkhorrornarrations.com. Get yourself a hoodie, phone case, things like that. 4 stories tonight. Story 1, strong young man alone on a winter sheep ranch where something past the fence line starts learning his voice. Story 2, it's about a man in a glass fire tower finds someone living in the trees below, climbing the stairs at night when he thinks he's not looking. Story 3 is about a family's first deer season without the man who built the camp, and something walks upright on the 2-track. Story 4 is about a caretaker stranded on a freezing lake, wet footprints coming up from the water, a dead voice calling to him to the ice. And 4 stories tonight. Make sure you get the lights off again, headphones if you use it, and let us begin.
Story 1. The Winter Camp. The seed shells were piling up in the ashtray of the old Ford before I even hit the county line, and I remember thinking that was about the only thing I still knew how to do right. Crack one on the left side of my teeth, work the meat loose with my tongue, spit the shell into the little tray, reach for another. I'd been doing it since I was a kid. My dad did it. When I get nervous, my hand just goes to the bag on its own, and I'd gone through half a bag of Davids between Cortez and the turnoff, so you can figure out how I was feeling. I had $80 in change to my name. That's the truth of where I was that winter. 24 years old and $80, driving a truck that wasn't really mine, down into a part of New Mexico I'd never seen, to take a job I'd gotten because my uncle knew a guy who knew Mr. Harmon. And Mr. Harmon needed somebody to sit on his place through the cold months while he took his family to Phoenix. Camp Tender, he called it. Watch the sheep, watch the house, keep the pipes from freezing and the coyotes off the ewes, and don't let the place burn down. $300 a week in a roof, and the roof was a single-wide trailer up against a hill, but $300 a week was $300 more than I'd been making, so I took it over the phone and didn't ask enough questions. The country changed as I came down out of Colorado. The mountains went flat, and the flat went red, and then it wasn't red anymore. It was this pale winter tan with snow laid in the low places like somebody had spilled it, pinon and juniper in dark clumps. Long ridges, the color of a dead campfire. You could see 40 miles in any direction, and not one light. I passed the Farmington turnoff and kept south and west on a state road. Then off the state road onto a county road, then off the county road onto a dirt track with a cattle guard that rattled the whole truck. And by then the sun was going down behind the Chusca foothills and turning everything the color of a bruise. I want to be honest about why I was there, and not just say it was the money, even though it was the money. I left Cortez under a bad cloud. I'd been staying with my mother, and I'd been drinking her grocery money. And one morning we'd said things to each other that you can't take back, and I'd packed a duffel and left before she was up so I wouldn't have to look at her face. That was 3 weeks before the Harmon job. In those 3 weeks, I hadn't called her, not once. I told myself I'd call when I had something to show, when I could say, here's a job, here's money coming in, see, I'm not what you think I am. Pride is a stupid thing, and it costs you people you love, and you don't figure that out until later. My sister Dana had texted me every couple of days in those 3 weeks. Little things. A photo of her dog. A meme. Where are you? You okay? She was 19 and still living at home, and she was the only person on earth who hadn't given up on me yet, and I hadn't told her where I was going either, because I didn't fully believe it was real until I was standing on it. The dirt track ran another 2 miles past the cattle guard, and then the place opened up in front of me. A long, low ranch house with a metal roof going orange in the last light. A windmill, the old kind, turning slow with a sound I'd learned to hate. Sheep pens and a lambing shed, and a couple of loafing sheds, all of it silver wood and rusted pipe. Behind the house the hill went up steep, junipers scattered on it like whiskers, and the trailer I'd be living in sat off to the side, hitched to nothing, up on cinder blocks with a stovepipe leaning out of the roof. Beyond all of it, the land just fell away west into the reservation, mile after mile of nothing, the Navajo Nation boundary somewhere out past where I could see, though I didn't know exactly where, and I never did learn. There was one other truck in the yard, a maroon Dodge with a stock rack, and a man leaning against it with his arms crossed, watching me come in. That was Marcus. I want to tell you about Marcus, because he was the realest person in this whole thing, and I don't want him to come off as some kind of prop. He was Navajo from over toward Newcomb, and he'd worked for Harmon on and off for something like 15 years. He was maybe 60, maybe older, hard to tell, with a face like a dry riverbed and hands that had done every kind of work there is. He wore a canvas coat, gone soft with age, and a ball cap that said nothing on it, just a plain gray cap and reading glasses pushed up on the brim. He didn't smile when I got out of the truck, but he didn't frown either. He looked at me the way a man looks at a tool he's not sure will hold up. "You the cowboy," he said. Not a question. "Levi," I said, and stuck out my hand. He took it. His grip was dry and hard, and he glanced down at the scar across the back of my hand, a shiny pink ridge running from the base of my thumb toward my wrist. I'd gotten it 2 summers back, building fence, a strand of barbed wire under tension that came loose and laid me open, and I'd been too broke and too dumb to get it stitched, so it had healed ugly. Marcus looked at it, and then looked at me and didn't say anything about it, and I liked him for that. "Harmon left this morning," he said. "I'll get you set up. Then I go home nights. I live over the ridge. I come back mornings to help with the feeding till you got the hang of it." He turned and started walking toward the pens, and I followed. And that was the whole hiring. No paperwork, nothing. 2 dogs came around the corner of the lambing shed then, and I stopped, because for a second I couldn't tell if they were friendly. They were border collie mixes, both of them, one black and white and one mostly white with a gray mask. The black one came right up and shoved his head against my leg. The white one hung back and watched. "Bo," Marcus said, and the black dog's ear flicked. "The other one's Girl. She don't warm up quick. She's the better dog, though. Bo's dumb, but he's got a good heart." He crouched, and the white dog came to him and pressed against his side, and he scratched under her jaw without looking at her, the way you do with a dog you've known a long time. They stay out with the sheep, mostly. They'll come up on the porch nights. You let 'em. We walked the place before full dark. He showed me the feed, the alfalfa in the big shed stacked to the rafters, the cake in 50-pound sacks. He showed me the ewes in the near pen, close to 100 head, heavy and slow and stupid the way sheep are, and the ones already showing they'd lamb early. He showed me the water, the float valves that stuck, the heater in the stock tank that you had to jiggle when it iced over. He showed me the generator behind the house for when the power dropped, which he said it would, and how to prime it. He showed me the propane and the wood for the trailer stove, and the county road out and how long it took to get to anything, which was too long. Cell phones didn't work out there, he told me. Not Harmon's, not his, not mine. Dead zone the whole basin. There was a landline in the house, an old wall phone in the kitchen, and it worked about half the time. And when it didn't work, it was because a line was down somewhere or a pole had leaned over in the wind, and you just waited for it to come back. "Half working," I said. "Half," he said. "Better than the phone in your pocket, which is no working." That was as close to a joke as he came the first day. By the time we finished, it was dark, real dark, the kind of dark you don't get in town where there's always some glow on the horizon. Out there, the sky came down to the ground on every side, and the stars were so thick they looked wrong, like too much salt spilled on a black table. The cold came down with the dark fast the way it does in the high desert, and my breath smoked, and the windmill kept turning with that long iron groan. And somewhere out past the pens, a coyote started up, and 2 or 3 others answered it, and then they all quit at once. Marcus was standing by his Dodge with the door open and the dome light on, and I saw him stop and listen when the coyotes cut off. Just for a second. Then he got in. "One thing," he said through the window, and the engine turned over. "Don't whistle out here after dark." I laughed a little, thinking it was a superstition, thinking he was ribbing the new guy. "Why's that?" He looked at me and he didn't laugh. "Just don't," he said. "You want something, you call out plain, in words. You don't whistle. Whistling carries funny out here." And he put the truck in gear and drove out, and I watched his taillights bounce down the track and go over the cattle guard and disappear. And then it was just me and the dogs and the sheep and the windmill and all that dark. And I stood in the yard cracking a sunflower seed and told myself 300 a week, 300 a week, and went inside to figure out the stove. That first week was fine. I want you to understand that. It was hard work and it was cold and it was lonesome, but it was fine, and I was better than I'd been in a while because I had a thing to do every day and a reason to get up. I'd learned the routine, and I'll walk you through it because the routine matters, because everything that happened later happened against the routine, and you can't feel how wrong it was unless you feel how normal the normal was. Up before light. The trailer would be cold. The stove burned down to coals, and I'd feed it and get the coffee on, this awful percolator coffee that tasted like a penny but got me moving. Then, out into the blue, dark to the sheds. The dogs would be on the porch of the house, curled tight, and they'd get up when they heard me and stretch and come along. We'd throw hay to the ewes and break the ice on the tanks and count heads best we could and look for any that were down or off. Marcus came most mornings that first week and showed me what to look at, how a ewe stands when she's going to lamb, how to tell a hurt one from a lazy one. Around midday there'd be a lull, and I'd go up to the house and use the landline if it was working and call, and then afternoon feeding and checking. And by dark, I was inside with the stove going and a can of chili and the little TV that only pulled in one station out of Farmington when the weather was right. I called Dana that first week, from the kitchen in the big house, standing at that old wall phone with the coiled cord. I remember the cord, because I stood there wrapping it around my scarred hand while we talked. "Where even are you?" she said. "Mom's worried. She won't say it, but she is." "I'm working," I said. "I got a real job, Dana. I'm watching a ranch down in New Mexico. Sheep and stuff. It pays good." "Sheep," she said, and I could hear her smiling. "You. Sheep. Shut up. You should call her." "I will," I said. When I got the first check. "I want to have something first." Dana went quiet for a second, and then she said the thing she always said, the thing she'd been saying to me since she was little, and I was the big brother who was supposed to have it figured out. "Don't be a stranger, Lee." That was hers. Lee, not Levi, and don't be a stranger. And she'd said it when I dropped her at school and when I left for jobs, and she said it now. It was our thing. It doesn't sound like much written down, but it was ours, the way families have those. "I won't," I said. "Love you. Tell your dog hey." I hung up and stood in that quiet kitchen and felt about as good as I'd felt in a month. I want you to remember that phrase. Don't be a stranger. Keep it somewhere. I'll need it later, and so will you. Marcus gave me the rest of the rules across that first week, and he never gave them all at once, and he never gave them like rules. He gave them like weather, like a man telling you it might snow, so bring a coat. We'd be doing some chore, and he'd just say a thing and go back to the chore, and I half heard them and half didn't, and I'm going to lay them out for you the way I wish I'd taken them, which is, seriously, we were stringing a new section of pen wire. My hand's already cold and clumsy, and he said, out of nothing, "If you're out after dark and you hear somebody call your name, you don't answer. You come inside. You don't call back." "Whose name?" I said, being smart. "Mine?" "Yours," he said, in a voice you know. You don't answer it and you don't go to it. You come in. I laughed, And he didn't, and he let the silence sit until I stopped laughing, and then he went back to the wire. Another time, evening, the dogs milling around the porch not wanting to go down to the sheep, he said, "If the dogs won't go out, don't make 'em. They know things before we do. You let 'em stay up on the porch, you don't drag 'em off it." And another time, and this was the one that stuck the most because of how he said it, low, not looking at me, we were watching the light go out of the sky and there was a good fresh snow coming, and he said, "Don't say your family's names out loud out here at night. Not your mother, not anybody. Keep 'em in your head if you gotta think of 'em. Don't say 'em out where the air can take 'em." That one I did ask about. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" I said. "What's going to take them?" And he looked at me for a long time, longer than was comfortable, and I saw him decide something, decide how much to say to a white kid from Cortez who'd laughed at him twice already. And what he decided was less than the whole thing. "There's things out here older than the sheep and older than the fence," he said. "You don't feed 'em by saying names. That's all. Humor an old man." And he wouldn't say more, and I let it go. Because I was cold, and I wanted my chili and my one TV station, and because I was 24 and I thought the world was a plain place with plain things in it, which is the exact kind of thinking that gets a man in trouble in a place like that. He said one more, the last of them, and he said it the day before things started. "Don't follow tracks." That was the whole rule. We'd cut a coyote trail in the snow going up the hill behind the trailer, and I'd said something about maybe I ought to sit up one night with the rifle and thin them out. And Marcus said, "You see tracks going off somewhere, you leave 'em be. You don't follow tracks out here. Whatever made 'em wants you to." And then he got in his Dodge and went home over the ridge, and that was the last easy day. Now I'll tell you about the first wrong thing, and it was small, and I want you to see how small it was, because that's how it works. It doesn't come in big. It comes in like a splinter you don't notice till it's been in your thumb a day. It was the 9th or 10th day, dusk. There had been snow the night before, 4 or 5 inches, clean and unbroken across the whole basin, and the sky had cleared and the temperature had dropped, and it was going to be a cold one, down in the teens. I went out to do the evening feed, and the dogs were on the porch of the big house, like always, and I whistled for them without thinking, the way you do, 2 notes, "Here, boy," and then I remembered Marcus and clamped it off, and I felt dumb, and I looked around like somebody might have heard, which, out there, nobody could have. Bo got up and came to me. Girl didn't. Girl stayed flat on the porch boards with her head down between her paws and her eyes rolled up watching the yard, and when I called her name plain, in words, like Marcus said, she pressed herself lower and would not come. And Bo, who'd started toward me, stopped halfway across the yard and turned and looked at the same thing Girl was looking at, which was nothing, which was the empty snow past the pens where the light was going blue, and Bo's tail went down and he came back and got up on the porch with Girl, and neither one of them would leave it. "If the dogs won't go out, don't make 'em." I stood there a second, then I told myself it was cold and they were being lazy, and I did the feeding myself, throwing hay to the ewes in the near pen with my breath smoking and the light dying. And the whole time, the 2 dogs sat up on that porch 40 yards behind me and watched me work, and I could feel them watching, and I didn't like it, and I told myself I was being a kid. Then the coyotes started, and they started close. Coyotes had sung every night since I got there. It was a normal sound, part of the dark, a yipping and a wailing off in the hills that could raise the hair on your neck if you let it, but that I'd gotten used to. This was different. This was close, right out past the pens, close enough that I should have been able to see them across that flat white snow in the last light, and I couldn't. I heard a whole chorus of them, more than I'd ever heard. A wall of that high broken yipping that seemed to come from everywhere along the fence line at once, and I stood in the pen with a flake of hay in my hands and turned in a circle trying to place it, and I could not put it anywhere. It was close, and it was all around, and there was nothing on the snow to make it. And then it stopped, not trailed off, not one dog at a time quitting the way real coyotes do, one falling out and then another, all of it at once, like a hand had come down on it, or like somebody had lifted a needle off a record. 1 second, the whole basin was screaming, and the next second, there was nothing but the windmill turning, and my own blood in my ears, and the 2 dogs on the porch making a sound I'd never heard a dog make, a low, steady moan, both of them deep in the chest. I went inside. I'm not ashamed to say it. I fed the stove and I locked the trailer door, which I had never bothered to lock, and I sat with one TV station coming in fuzzy, and I told myself coyotes do funny things, and sound does funny things in the cold, and snow, which is even true, sound really does carry strange over snow. That's what I mean about rationalizing. Every single thing that happened out there, you could hang a reasonable coat on it, and I hung coats on all of them, right up until the end, when there weren't any coats left. In the morning I found the tracks. I almost didn't. I was doing the round, walking the fence line of the near pen with the dogs way back by the sheds not wanting to come, and I came around the west corner of the pen where the snow was smooth, and there was a line of tracks in it, fresh from the night before, and I stopped to read them the way Marcus had taught me to read tracks, because that's a thing you learn out there, and what I read didn't make sense. They came in from the open country, from the west, and for the first 30 or 40 feet they were coyote tracks, big ones. Bigger than any coyote I'd seen, but coyote, 4 feet. The neat little diamond pattern of a canine trotting. And then they changed. I stood there in the cold, with my coffee going cold in my hand, and I watched the tracks change under my eyes, the way you'd watch a magic trick and not be able to say when the cards switched. The 4-foot pattern got longer and got sloppier, and then it wasn't 4 feet anymore. It was 2. It was 2 long, bare human feet, toes and heel and arch, pressed deep in the snow like something heavy, walking upright, and they went on that way for maybe 6 strides, straight toward the pen, straight toward the sheep, and then they stopped. They just stopped, mid-stride. There was a last footprint, a left foot, deep, the toes dug in like it was about to take the next step, and then nothing. No next print. No mark where something jumped or was picked up or brushed the snow smooth. The snow past that last print was clean and unbroken all the way to the fence, and there was no way for anything to be standing there, and no way for it to have gone anywhere. It walked in on 4 feet, and stood up on 2, and took 6 steps toward my sheep, and then it wasn't there anymore. I want to tell you I ran. I didn't. I crouched down and I looked at that last bare footprint for a long time, and I put my own boot next to it, and it was bigger than my boot, a lot bigger, and the arch was too long and the toes were too long, and something about the shape of it made my stomach go cold in a way the weather hadn't. And then I stood up and I looked out west at all that empty snow, mile after mile of it running down toward the reservation with nothing on it, and I had the exact feeling you have when you know you're being watched and can't find the eyes. And I went and I did my chores, because what else was I going to do? Call somebody? The phone was down that morning, dead air when I picked it up. Drive off? I had $80, and this was the job. When Marcus came that morning, I took him to the tracks. I didn't say what I thought. I just said, come look at this. Some big coyote did a funny thing here. And I walked him around to the west corner of the pen. The tracks were gone, not covered. It hadn't snowed, not brushed out. There was no drag mark. Just gone, the whole line of them, the coyote part and the human part, like they'd never been in that snow at all, and the snow lay smooth and clean from the open country right up to the fence, unbroken, with only my own boot prints from that morning tracking across it. I stood there, and my mouth was dry. They were right here, I said, a whole line of them. I swear to God, Marcus, they came in on 4 feet and stood up and walked on 2 feet and just stopped. Marcus didn't say anything for a while. He looked at the smooth snow, and he looked at the open country to the west, and his jaw was working a little, and then he did a thing I didn't understand at the time. He reached in his coat pocket, and he took out a little leather pouch, soft old buckskin, cinched with a cord, and he opened it and took a pinch of something out of it. some kind of yellowish dust, and he touched it to his own tongue and then to the top of his head, and then he cast a little of it out toward the west into the wind, saying something under his breath in Navajo that I couldn't have repeated and wouldn't try to. It took about 10 seconds. Then he cinched the pouch and put it away and looked at me. "You didn't follow him," he said. "The tracks, last night, when you found him, or however you found him. You didn't go out west and follow him." "No," I said. "It was morning. They were already here when I found them." "But you didn't follow him," he said again, and there was something under it, and I understood he needed the answer to be no. "No," I said. "I swear. I looked at them and I did the feeding." He nodded slow. "Good," he said. "That's good, Levi." And that was the first time he'd used my name and not called me the coal boy. And it should have felt good, and it didn't, because of how he said it, like a man relieved about a thing he wasn't going to explain. I asked him straight out then. I said, "Marcus, what is it? What was that? What are these rules about?" And he looked at me a long time, and I watched him decide again, and this time he decided a little more than last time, but still not the whole thing. "There's a kind of thing out here," he said. "People that ain't just people, that can put on a coyote or a wolf or a dog or a man and go around in it. Old, mean, sick things made by people who did bad medicine a long time ago, and some of them not so long ago. My grandmother knew about them. My mother told me the rules when I was a boy, and I'm telling them to you now, because you're out here alone, and you're not from here, and you don't know how to act." He stopped. His jaw worked. "We don't say its name," he said, out loud. "I'm not going to say it, and you're not going to say it. Saying it out here is like knocking on its door. You understand me? We don't say it. You just do the rules, and you'll be all right. Don't whistle. Don't answer your name. Don't say your people's names out here at night. Don't make the dogs go where they don't want. Don't follow tracks. That's it. That's the whole thing. You do those, and it's got no way in." And I nodded, and I mostly believed him by then. God help me, standing over that smooth snow where a line of tracks had been an hour before, and I thought, all right, I'll do the rules. And I meant it, and I want you to notice, because I've thought about it 1,000 times since, that I did do the rules. Almost all of them. I did them right up until the one I broke, and I didn't even know I was breaking it when I did. That was the first wrongness, the tracks and the coyotes and the dogs. And after that, they came faster, and I'll give them to you in order, because the order is how I finally couldn't lie to myself anymore. The taps came 4 nights later. I was asleep in the trailer, which is a thing you learn to do out there even when part of you doesn't want to, and I came up out of it all at once the way you do when a sound gets into your sleep. The stove had burned down, and the trailer was cold and dark, and I lay there listening and didn't know what had woke me, and then it came again. 3 taps on the window over the bed. Tap, tap, tap. Even spaced. Deliberate. The knuckle of something on the glass, patient, like a person who knows you're in there and has all night. The window over the bed in that trailer was high. I want you to understand the height. The trailer sat up on cinder blocks, so the floor was already a good 3 feet off the ground, and the window was up near the top of the wall, so the bottom edge of that glass was, 7 feet off the dirt outside. Maybe more. There was nothing to stand on out there. No step, no crate, nothing. For a man to tap that window, he'd have to be, 8 feet tall, or standing on something, and there wasn't anything to stand on. I didn't turn the light on. I don't know why. Some animal part of me knew not to. I lay there in the dark, and I looked up at the window, and the window was just a gray square of starlight, nothing in it. And I lay there, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound. And after a while, a long while, maybe 2 minutes, that felt like an hour, the taps did not come again. And I did not sleep the rest of that night. I sat up with my back against the cold wall, and my grandfather's 30-30 across my knees, and toward morning I got up and looked at the clock on the stove, and it had happened, best I could tell from when I woke, at right around 3:10 in the morning. I checked the ground under the window when it got light, smooth. No prints, nothing to stand on, nothing that had stood. Coat on it, a branch, the wind, a bird. There were no branches near that window, and there was no wind that night, and I have never heard of a bird that taps 3 times even, and stops. But I hung the coat on it anyway because I had to be able to go back out there and do the feeding, and you can't do the feeding if you let yourself know. The next one I couldn't coat so easy. It was maybe a week on, and it was evening again. That's when most of it came, in the blue time between the sun going and full dark, and I was down at the pens finishing up. And from off in the dark past the lambing shed, from the direction of the far pens where I couldn't see, Marcus called my name. "Levi," he said. "Hey, Levi, come here." And I'll tell you, my whole body started to go before my head caught up, because it was his voice. It was exactly his voice, the flat way he said my name, the little downward turn on the end of it, everything. I had a flake of hay in my hands, and I dropped it and took 2 steps toward the shed, and I opened my mouth to call back, "Yeah, coming," and the word was right there on my tongue. If you're out after dark and you hear somebody call your name, you don't answer. I shut my mouth. I stood there with my mouth shut and my heart going like a rabbit's, and I did not answer. And the voice called again, closer now, from just the other side of the lambing shed wall, 10 feet from me through the boards. "Levi," it said, "come here. Come on now." And it was so exactly Marcus that I almost broke. And then I thought, Marcus went home. Marcus went home 2 hours ago. Over the ridge, I watched his taillights. His truck's not in the yard. And the second I thought that, the second I knew for a fact that Marcus was not standing behind that shed, the voice said my name one more time. Levi, soft, right against the boards. And there was something under it now. Something in it that wasn't Marcus and had never been Marcus, and was only wearing Marcus the way that thing in the snow had worn a coyote. And I turned around and I walked. I did not run. I made myself walk back across the yard to the trailer. And the dogs were already up on the porch of the big house, pressed flat and moaning that low moan. And I went inside and I locked the door and I sat down on the floor with my back against it because I did not trust my legs. In the morning I asked Marcus. "Careful," I said. "You didn't come back last night, did you? After you went home. You didn't drive back over for anything." And he stopped what he was doing and he looked at me and his face changed and he said, "No." "Why?" And I told him about the voice at the shed, his voice calling me, and I watched his face while I told him, and I watched it go gray under the brown. And when I got to the part about how I didn't answer, his shoulders came down a little, like the relief the other time, and when I got to the part about the thing under the voice, the thing that wasn't him, he closed his eyes for a second. "You did right," he said. "Not answering. That's the most important one, Levi. Of all of them, that's the one. It's learning you now. It's been listening. It heard me call you enough times it can do my voice. That's what it does. It takes voices." He looked out west, the way he always did, at that empty snow. "It'll try others," he said. "It'll try ones that get to you worse than mine. You hold to the rule no matter whose voice. No matter whose." And there was something in how he said no matter whose that I didn't want to look at, so I didn't. That was the day I should have quit. I know that now. I even thought about it that day, standing there in the cold, with Marcus's gray face in front of me. But I had by then 3 weeks in, and Harmon paid at the end of the month, and if I left before the end of the month I'd get nothing. I'd walk with my $80 back to Cortez, and my mother's face, and I could not do it. I could not go home broke and beat, and tell them a monster ran me off a sheep ranch. Do you see? Pride and money, the 2 things that put me in that trailer, they kept me in it too, past the point where any sane man would have gone. $300 a week. Don't be a stranger with something to show. I'd stay to the check. The pacing thing happened 2 days after that. I had to run into the little town for supplies, propane and dog food and a few groceries. An hour and change each way on the dirt and the county road and the state road. And I did it in the afternoon so I'd be back before dark, and I misjudged it. And coming back, the sun was already down behind the Chuskas, and the light was going, and I was pushing the old Ford harder than the road wanted along the last stretch of dirt, with the fence line running alongside me on the right. The property fence, 4 strands of barbed wire on juniper posts, and out past the fence in the open country, keeping pace with the truck, there was something running. I saw it first in the corner of my eye, and I thought, coyote, and then I thought, no, and I did not turn my head. I want to be clear about that. I kept my eyes on the road, and I watched it in the edge of my vision the whole way, and I never once turned and looked at it straight, and that is the only reason, I think, that I am able to tell you this. It was pacing me. The truck was doing maybe 40 on that dirt, bouncing, and it was keeping up out past the fence, 40 yards off, and 40 on that ground is not a thing that runs, and it was running, or it was going along somehow, low, hunched, on all fours part of the time, this long loping thing eating up the ground, and then for a stretch, it came up. It came up onto 2 legs while it was going without slowing and ran upright, and a thing that runs on all fours does not just stand up and keep running at the same speed, and this did. It went from 4 to 2 and back to 4, out there in the edge of my eye, keeping level with my door, 40 yards off in the failing light, for most of a mile. I did not look at it. I gripped that wheel with my scarred hand until it ached, and I kept my eyes on the road, and I told the old Ford to hold together, and I drove. And every part of me wanted to turn and see it clear, and every part of me knew that turning and seeing it clear was exactly what it wanted, was maybe the same as answering my name, and I did not do it. And when the truck came up on the gate, and I had to slow to make the turn into the yard, the thing out past the fence stopped. I felt it stop. In the edge of my eye, it went from that long loping run to standing, upright, still, watching the truck turn in, and I did not look. I made the turn, and I gunned it up to the house, and I got out, and I did not look back at the fence line. I went inside, and the dogs were already there on the porch, flat, moaning, and I let them in the trailer that night, both of them, which I wasn't supposed to do. Harmon didn't want the dogs inside, but I let them in, and they came gladly, and they lay against the door, and we all 3 listened to the windmill turn. Now I have to tell you about the call, because the call is where I broke a rule, and I didn't know I was doing it, and it's the thing that turned it from a thing that was circling me to a thing that had me. The phone in the big house was working that night, the landline, and I hadn't talked to Dana in over a week, and I was scared and lonesome, and I wanted my sister's voice, a real one I knew for a fact was hers. So after I got the dogs settled, I went out across the dark yard to the house, quick, with the flashlight, and I let myself into the cold kitchen, and I stood at that wall phone, and I called home. Dana answered, and it was so good to hear her, so good, that all the fear came up in me at once, the way it does when you finally get to a safe place. And we talked, and I didn't tell her the real stuff. I couldn't, but I told her I was tired, and the work was hard, and it was lonesome out there. And she did her thing, she cheered me up, and she told me about her dog, and about some boy she liked, and about Mom planting bulbs, even though it was winter, because Mom read they'd come up in spring. And here's the thing I did. The kitchen had a window over the sink, and I'd cracked the back door because the kitchen was stuffy with the propane heat. And I was standing there with the phone cord wrapped around my scarred hand, looking out that black window at the yard. And Dana said something funny, and I laughed, and I said her name. I said, "Aw, Dana," out loud, in that kitchen with the door cracked to the night. "Dana, you kill me." And then, because I was warm and safe and stupid and happy for the first time in weeks when we were hanging up, she said her thing. She said, "Don't be a stranger, Lee." And I said it back. I said, "I won't. Love you, Dana." And I hung up. Don't say your family's names out loud out here at night. I didn't even remember the rule until I was walking back across the yard to the trailer. It hit me halfway across, in the dark, with the flashlight beam bouncing, and I stopped dead in the middle of the yard, and I felt the cold go all through me that had nothing to do with the weather, because I had said her name twice, Dana, Dana, out where the air could take it, and I let her say our thing, our private thing, out loud into that cracked door. And I stood in the middle of the yard, and I listened to the whole basin, and the whole basin was quiet, dead quiet, no coyotes, no wind, just the windmill turning. And I ran the last of the way to the trailer and got in with the dogs and locked the door. Nothing happened that night. That was almost the worst part. Nothing happened. And I lay there thinking maybe it doesn't work like that. Maybe Marcus was just being careful. Maybe I got away with it. And I almost let myself believe that. For a day and a half, I almost let myself believe it. Then it came to the window 2 nights after the call. 3:10 in the morning again. Or close. I woke to it the way I'd woke to the taps all at once, and the trailer was cold and dark, and the dogs were awake, both of them, up on their feet, facing the window over the bed, not making a sound, and that silence out of them was worse than the moaning. And I lay there and I looked up at the gray square of the window. There was a sound at it, not a tap this time, a breath, a slow, wet breath fogging the glass from outside, from a mouth up at that impossible height, 7-8 feet off the ground, and then a voice, low, working, like a throat that wasn't shaped right for words, and was learning them, and it said, in Dana's voice, in my sister's exact voice, "Don't be a stranger, Lee." I have to stop a second even now. It was her voice. It was her words, our words, the thing only she said, the thing she'd said to me on the phone 40 hours before through a cracked door. And now it was up at that black window in the dark, saying it back to me in her voice. "Don't be a stranger, Lee." Soft, coaxing. "Lee, don't be a stranger." And I understood. Lying there, I understood all the way down that it had been at the door that night. That it had taken her name and taken our words, the way it had taken Marcus's voice off the boards of the shed, and that it was showing me now, deliberate, that it had them. That it had reached all the way down a phone line and into my family, and taken the one thing I had that was safe. I did not answer it. I lay there with the 30-30, and I did not make a sound, and I did not turn on the light, and the dog stood between me and the window like a wall, stiff, silent, and the voice said our words a few more times. Patient, working. "Don't be a stranger, Lee, come see me. Don't be a stranger." And then the wet breathing stopped, and the window was just a gray square again, and I lay awake until the sky went pale. In the morning I was at the fence when Marcus's Dodge came over the cattle guard, and I met him before he'd even shut the engine off, and I told him, and I heard my own voice shaking, and I didn't care. I told him about the call, about saying Dana's name, about our words, and I watched him go, still behind the wheel, with his hand still on it, and then I told him about the window and the voice, and when I said it had used her words, our private words, he shut his eyes and he said something in Navajo, quiet, that I think was a prayer. Then he got out of the truck and he did a thing he'd never done. He put his hand on my shoulder, this old man with the dry, hard hands. He gripped my shoulder and he looked me in the face and he said, "You have to go today. You pack your things and you get in that truck and you drive out and you don't stop and you don't come back for the check or nothing. It's got your voice now. You gave it a name and a voice, and now it's got a way in, and it's going to keep coming till it gets you to open the door or answer it or walk out to it. And one of these nights, you're going to be tired enough or scared enough or lonesome enough, and you're going to do it. You have to go before that." Herman's family. I said, "Stupid. Still thinking about the job, about the sheep, about the check, the sheep. I can't just leave the sheep. Who watches the place?" "I'll tell Harmon the place is no good this winter," Marcus said. "I'll tell him something. The sheep are just sheep. You're not going to be sheep. You hear me. You go." And then he reached in his coat and he took out that little buckskin pouch, the one he'd used on the tracks, the corn pollen, and he pressed it into my hand, my scarred hand, and closed my fingers over it. "You keep this," he said. "You keep it on you. It won't stop it, but it'll help you keep your own mind, keep you from answering when you shouldn't. Corn pollen, my mother's. You keep it and you go. And his hand was shaking, this hard old man, his hand was shaking around mine, and that scared me worse than anything, worse than the window, because Marcus was the one who knew. Marcus had done the rules his whole life and known the country his whole life, and Marcus was scared. I said I'd go. I meant it. I told him I'd pack up that afternoon and drive out before dark. And Marcus nodded, and he looked at the sky to the west, at the light, the way you check the light when you don't want to be caught out in the dark. And there was weather coming, a big bank of it low and gray out over the reservation, and he said, "Storm coming in tonight. You get gone before it. You don't want to be here in a storm." And he got in his Dodge, and he did not do the morning chores with me. He just went straight home, over the ridge. And that was the last I saw of Marcus that winter, his taillights going over the cattle guard in the gray morning. And I stood there in the yard with a pouch of corn pollen in my hand and every intention in the world of leaving. But I didn't leave. And I have to tell you why, because it matters. Because it wasn't just stubbornness, and I've had a long time to be honest with myself about it. Part of it was the check. I won't pretend that wasn't in it. 2 more days, and it was the end of the month, and Harmon paid. And I thought, 2 days, I made it this long, 2 more days, and I've got money in my pocket. And I go home like a man who did the job, instead of a man who ran. Part of it was, I flat did not fully believe it, even then, even after the window. In the daylight, with the sun on the snow, and the sheep bawling, and the propane truck's tire tracks in the yard from last week, the world was so plainly the plain world. I'd always lived in that the thing at the window, 3:10 in the morning, felt like a fever dream. Felt like something I'd half made up out of Marcus's stories and being lonesome. That's the trick of it. In the day you can't believe the night. And part of it, the deepest part, the part I'm least proud of, was that leaving meant going home, and going home meant my mother's face. And I would almost rather have faced the thing at the window than my mother's face with nothing to show her. That's how sick pride is. It'll keep you somewhere that's killing you because the alternative embarrasses you. So I spent the day telling myself I'd leave in the morning instead. One more night, pack up easy, sleep, drive out at first light, and be at Harmon's payday having done the whole month. One more night. And the whole day while I told myself that, the storm came on, that gray bank sliding in off the reservation and filling the sky. And by afternoon the light was the color of dishwater, and the wind had come up out of the west, cold, steady, pushing the first snow ahead of it, fine and hard. And by the time the early winter dark came down, the storm came down with it, and the wind was howling around the corners of the trailer, and the snow was going sideways past the windows in the dark, and I was not going anywhere. And I knew, sitting there with the stove roaring and the dogs pressed against my legs, I knew I had made the wrong choice, the one Marcus told me not to make, and I knew it too late. The power went out around 9. The lights and the little TV died all at once, and the propane heater's fan wound down, and the trailer went dark except for the orange glow of the wood stove through its little window. I had a flashlight and a couple of candles, and I lit a candle, and I sat and I listened to the storm, and I told myself the power dropped all the time in weather. Marcus said so. The generator was behind the house. I could go prime the generator, and I looked out the trailer window at the yard, at the dark, at the snow going sideways, at the 40 yards of open ground between me and the house, and the generator behind it, and I thought about crossing that ground in the dark and the storm, and I did not go prime the generator. The dogs would not have let me anyway. They were against the door. The landline I couldn't check without crossing to the house, but I had my cell phone, dead zone or not, and I turned it on, and it found no bars. Of course it found no bars. It had never once found a bar out there, but I dialed 911 anyway, and I put it to my ear, and there was nothing. Not a ring, not a recording, not even the fast busy you get when a call won't go. Just nothing. Dead air. The phone against my ear in the candlelight, and the storm outside, and no help anywhere in the world within an hour's drive on roads that were closing with snow, and I understood. Finally, all the way, exactly how alone I was. There was no calling anybody. There was no help coming. There was just me and the dogs and the stove and the door and the storm and whatever was out in it. The scratching started on the roof around midnight. It came over the wind, which was loud, so it was up close, right over me, a long, slow drag of something across the metal roof of the trailer, and then again, and then a shifting weight, a settling, like something heavy had gotten up onto the roof and was moving around up there, its weight making the thin metal pop and give. The dogs came off the floor. Bo started that low moan, and Girl did something worse. Girl backed into the corner by the stove and got low and showed her teeth and stared at the ceiling, tracking the weight as it moved. And I stood in the middle of that little trailer with the 30-30 and the candle, and I tracked it to the two of us, the dog and me, watching the ceiling as the weight moved over us from the back of the trailer toward the front, slow, dragging, settling, its claws or its nails or whatever it had going scurritch across the metal. And then it went still, up over the door, and I heard it come down. I heard the weight come off the roof and land in the snow by the door with a heavy, soft crunch, and then there was nothing but the storm for a minute, and I stood there facing the door with the rifle up, and the dogs were both behind me now, pressed into the corner, and I thought, maybe it's over, maybe it came down and left. Then something knocked on the door. Not the window this time. The door. 3 knocks. Even. Patient. Exactly like the taps on the glass had been. Tap, tap, tap. A knuckle on the door of my trailer at midnight in a whiteout, and I did not move, and a voice came through the door, and it was my mother's voice. I have to tell you about this part slow because it's the part I live in. It was my mother. Not close, not a rough copy. It was her voice, the exact grain of it, the little tiredness that had been in it the last few years, and it said, Levi. Levi, honey, open the door. It's cold out here. And everything in me, everything, all the shame I'd carried for weeks, all the missing her I hadn't let myself feel, all of it came up my throat at once, and my eyes went hot, and my hands started for the lock before my head could stop it, because it was my mother, out in the storm, cold, and I had left her. I had left her without a word, and here she was at my door. Don't answer your name, no matter whose voice. I stopped my hand. God, I stopped my hand, and I stood there shaking with the rifle and the tears running down my face, and the voice said, Levi, please, I'm so cold, why won't you let me in? I drove all this way. I forgave you. Honey, I forgave you a long time ago. Don't be a stranger. And it slid right there on the last words. It slid from my mother's voice to Dana's voice. Don't be a stranger, Lee. And back. Levi, honey, open the door, working me, hitting every soft place I had. And it knew them. It knew all of them. It had reached down the phone line and into my whole family, and it had my shame and my love and my sister's private words and my mother's forgiveness that I wanted more than anything in the world. And it laid all of it against that door, and it pushed, and the smell came under the door. I've never been able to describe it right. It came in under the door with the cold, and it was wet dog first, that heavy wet fur smell, and then under that, worse, it was carrion roadkill in August, that sweet rotten thickness that gets in the back of your throat, and under that coldest, something like pennies, like a fistful of pennies, like blood gone cold, and all three together coming under my door in the dark while my mother's voice asked me to let her in. And I put my back against the far wall of that trailer, and I slid down it to the floor, and I put the rifle across my knees, and I got Marcus's pouch out of my coat, and I held it in my scarred hand, and I did not answer, and I did not open the door. The dogs saved my life, or Bo did. Here's what happened, and this is the one image I told you I'd give you clear, and I'm sorry, but you should have it because it's true. Bo, who Marcus said was dumb but had a good heart, Bo broke. He'd been backed into the corner with Girl and me, and the voice and the smell and the weight of the thing on the other side of that door got to be too much for him, and he did the thing a good dog does. The loyal, stupid thing. He charged the door. He came off the floor barking, that big, real bark finally, and he hit the door with his front paws, barking and snarling, and I lunged for him, but I was too slow. And the door, I thought I'd locked the door. I had locked the door, but the door came open. It came open like it had never been locked at all, swung in on the storm in the dark, and Bo went out. Bo went out into the snow barking, and I saw, in the half-second the door was open, in the candlelight in the storm. I saw it, out by the windmill, 40 feet off, low in the snow, on all fours. And as Bo went at it, it came up. It stood up out of its crouch the way a man stands, but wrong, the joints going the wrong way, and then riding, unfolding too tall. And it was wearing a hide, some big animal's hide over its back and shoulders, wet and hanging, and the head under it turned toward the door, toward me, and there were two eyes catching the candlelight, yellow, flat, up high, at the height of my window, at the height a man's eyes would be if the man were 8 feet tall, and they were not an animal's eyes, and they were not a man's eyes, and it moved. It took a step toward Bo and toward the open door, and the way it moved is the thing I can't shake. It moved like something that had watched men walk, and was doing an imitation of it, relearning it. The weight going on to the wrong parts of the foot, the knees hitching, a thing remembering how to be a man and getting it almost right, and the almost being the whole horror of it. And I did not go out. God forgive me, Bo went out, and I did not go out after him. I got up off the floor and I grabbed the door and I hauled it shut against the wind with everything I had, and I threw the bolt and I put my back against it and I held it, and outside Bo's barking went up high and frantic, and then it changed into a sound I will hear for the rest of my life, a yelp and then a wet tearing and then nothing, cut off all at once, the way the coyotes had cut off that first night, all at once, like a hand coming down, and then there was just the storm and the smell coming under the door, and my mother's voice, softer now, satisfied almost, saying, "Levi, honey, open the door." I held the door until dawn. I don't know how to tell you what that was, holding a door for 6 hours with your back against it in the dark while the storm screamed, and a thing that had your family's voices walked around your trailer in the snow. Girl came and pressed against me, and we held it together, the dog and me, and the thing came to the window and breathed on the glass and said our words, all our words, my mother's and Dana's, cycling through them, patient. And once it dragged something along the outside wall of the trailer, the whole length of it, slow, a claw or a nail, scurrich, and once it was on the roof again, and once it was so quiet and so long gone that I almost got up to look, and Girl growled low in her chest against my leg, and I did not get up, and I held the pouch and I did not answer, and I did not open the door, and somewhere in there I started saying the only thing I could think of to say, which was not a prayer I knew. I don't really pray. I just said, out loud, low, over and over, my sister's name and my mother's name, but inside my head this time, not out loud. I kept them inside my head where the air couldn't take them. I held their names in my head like holding a coal, and I did not say them out loud, and I did not open the door, and the sky went pale. And when the light came, it went. I felt it go the way I'd felt it stop pacing the truck, the pressure of it lifting off the trailer all at once, and the smell thinned out, and the voices stopped. And there was just the storm dying down to a gray still morning, and the windmill turning, and my legs so stiff I couldn't stand at first. When I could stand, I looked out the window. The yard was white and smooth, drifted deep. The storm had laid a foot of new snow over everything, and it was clean, unbroken, no tracks, no marks, nothing by the windmill, nothing by the door, like there had never been anything there at all. And Out past the pens, where the snow ran off toward the reservation, there was one dark shape on the white small, and I made myself go out to it in the cold gray morning with the rifle, and it was Bo, or it was most of Bo, and I'm not going to tell you about that. I'm not going to describe it. I'll just say there was less of him than there should have been, and what there was had been done in a way no coyote does it, and the snow around him was clean, no tracks. Nothing had walked up to him or away from him. He was just lying out there in the middle of unbroken snow like he'd fallen out of the sky. Girl would not come out of the trailer. I had to carry her to the truck. I packed in 20 minutes. I threw my duffel in the old Ford and I put Girl on the seat, and I did not do the feeding. The sheep bawled at me from the pens and I did not feed them. Marcus said the sheep were just sheep, and he was right. And I got in the truck and it started. Thank God it started, and I drove out. The dirt track was drifted, but the Ford's an old truck and it goes. And I got over the cattle guard and onto the county road, which the county had plowed some, and I drove. And I did not look at the fence line, and I did not look in the mirror. And I got to the state road, and then I got to town, and I stopped at the first place with a light on, a gas station, and I sat in the lot with the engine running and my hand shaking on the wheel and Marcus's pouch still in my fist. And I cracked a sunflower seed, the first one in the day, and my hands were shaking so bad I dropped it, and I put my head down on the wheel and I stayed like that a while. I called Harmon from the gas station payphone. I told him part of it. I told him the storm knocked the power out and killed a dog and spooked me bad and I couldn't stay, and that I was sorry, and he could keep the check. I didn't want the check. I just wanted him to know the place was empty so he could get somebody out to the sheep. He was quiet a while, and then he asked which dog, and I told him Bo. And he was quiet again, and then he said, in a different voice, was it a good clean kill, or was it torn up? And I understood from the way he asked that Harmon knew something too, that this wasn't the first winter, that maybe that was why the family went to Phoenix and hired a stranger from out of state to sit the place in the cold. And I said, it was torn up. And Harmon didn't say anything for a long time, and then he said, you go on home, son. Thank you for calling. You go on home. And he hung up. He never sent the check, and I never asked. I kept the dog. Girl rode home with me to Cortez on the seat of the old Ford, and she's asleep by my chair right now. Gray in the muzzle, an old dog. And she still won't go out after dark, not for anything. And I don't make her. I called my mother from a diner outside Shiprock, before I even got out of New Mexico. I couldn't wait anymore. All that shame I'd carried for weeks, all that pride about having something to show, it had burned off in that trailer holding the door, and I just wanted her voice, the real one. And I stood at the diner payphone and she answered, and I said, Mom, it's Levi. And my voice broke. And she said, Levi, honey, where are you? Are you all right? And it was her. It was her real voice, warm and worried, and it was so close to what the thing had said at my door that for 1 second, one terrible second, standing in that warm diner in the daylight, I couldn't be sure. And then she said, I've been worried sick, you idiot. Why didn't you call? And no thing that wasn't her would ever have called me an idiot like that, with that much love in it. And I knew it was her. And I told her I was coming home. And I told her I was sorry. And I did not tell her about any of the rest of it. And I have never told her. And I never will. I kept Marcus's pouch. It's in my truck, in the console, and I don't take it out. I never saw Marcus again. I thought about trying to find him, to thank him, to tell him I did the rules. I held the door. I kept the names inside my head at the end. But I don't have a number for him, and I'm not going back down that county road to knock on doors over the ridge. And anyway, I think he knows. I think he knew when he pressed that pouch in my hand, and his own hand was shaking, that either I'd get out or I wouldn't, and there wasn't anything else he could do for me, and he did the one thing he could, which was give me the rules and the pollen and tell me to go, and I did go. One night too late, but I went. That was the winter of 2017. It's been a while now. I got a real job, a good one, welding, and I'm not broke anymore. And I made things right with my mother, mostly. And I see Dana all the time, and she still says her thing. Don't be a stranger. Lee, And every single time she says it, something goes cold and quiet in me for just a second before I say it back, because I heard it in the dark once in her voice, out of a mouth up at a window 7 feet off the ground. And here's the thing. Here's the thing that I didn't leave behind on that ranch, that I brought home with me, and that lives here now. Last week, my mother called up the stairs to me from the kitchen. "Levi," just my name. "Levi, come here a second." Ordinary. Nothing. And I was at the top of the stairs, and I opened my mouth to answer, and I didn't. My hand had gone to the seed bag on the shelf, and it went still, and I stood there at the top of my own stairs, in my own safe house in the daylight, and I did not answer my mother's voice. I went down and looked at her first. Looked at her face and made sure it was her, before I said anything, and it was her. Of course it was her, and she looked at me funny, and I laughed it off. But I do that now. I always look first. And this evening, just now, I was out on the porch with Girl in the last of the light, and the neighbors' kids were playing somewhere down the block and off past the fence line, out where the sagebrush starts, and the land opens up toward the county line. A coyote started up, and another answered it. A whole little chorus of them, the way they do at dusk, and Girl lifted her head. And then it cut off. All at once, every one of them, quiet, at the same moment, the way a hand comes down, and my hand, reaching for another seed, went still in the bag, and I did not move, and I did not call the dog, and I sat there on my own porch, in the dark that was coming down, listening to the quiet where the coyotes had been, and I waited. Story 2. Copper Point. The propane fridge ticked twice and went quiet, and I lay there in the dark of the cab listening to the mountain breathe. Wind came up the west face in long pushes, hit the guy wires, and made a low hum. I had already stopped hearing most nights. This was the third week. I could tell time by that hum, the way I used to tell time by the whine of the head saw at the mill, that particular pitch it made just before it bit into a log. My body still expected the whistle at 7. My body still expected a lot of things that were gone. I rolled a cigarette by feel. I keep my tobacco in a Sucrets tin because the lid seals and the mice up here would eat a man's boots if he let them. I got the paper going, licked it, twisted the end, and put it behind my ear the way I always do. I would smoke maybe half of it in the morning and pinch it out and swear that was the last one. I had been swearing that for 11 years. That is the kind of man I am. If you want to know, I quit things part way. I quit drinking part way more times than I can count, which is the whole reason I was up on that peak at all, drying out at 4,000 feet, with nobody to hand me a bottle, even if I begged. My name is Wade Corliss. That summer I was 38 years old, laid off from the Stimson mill in Libby when they cut the second shift, and freshly divorced from a woman named Nicole, who I still loved in the stupid, useless way you love a thing you broke yourself. We had a daughter, Emma, who was 9 that year, and who liked horses and the color that is not quite purple and not quite blue, and who I was supposed to think about every single day, and did, though not in any way that helped her. The lookout job came through a guy named Chuck, who used to run Green Chain with me. He said the Forest Service was short a body on a peak in the cabinets, and they would take anybody with a pulse and no felonies who could pass the radio test. Copper Point. A living glass cab on a tower, 100 and some steps of open stair, up a steel frame, a mile and a quarter of trail from where the road quit. I would sit up there from mid-June to the middle of September and watch for smoke and call it in, and mostly I would watch nothing at all, because most days nothing burns, and that is the job. You are paid to be bored in a beautiful place. You are paid to notice the one day out of 90 when boredom would kill people. I took it because it paid, and because it put me somewhere I could not get to a liquor store, and because Nicole's lawyer had used the word unsupervised about me in a way that made my ears ring. And I thought, if I could show up in September with a season of Forest Service work behind me, and money in the account, and no drink on my breath, maybe that word would stop following me around. That was the plan. Men like me always have a plan. The plan is usually the last honest thing about us. Del Ferris drove me in. Del was the district ranger, a heavy-set man near 60 with a white mustache stained yellow in the middle and hands like he had been shaking gravel his whole life. He drove a green Forest Service pickup up a road that got worse the higher it went, until it was 2 ruts and a spine of rock, and he talked the whole way in the flat, unbothered voice of a man who has said everything he was saying to 20 other people before me. Radio check twice a day, he said. Morning at 0900, evening at 1800. You miss one, I don't panic. You miss 2, I start making calls. You're lookout 7. There's a laminated card by the set with all the frequencies and the other towers. Bear Creek is lookout 4. That's Ruth. She's been up there since before you were potty trained. She'll talk your ear off if you let her. Good to know, I said. Water's catchment off the roof, into the cistern. You ration in a dry spell. Propane runs the fridge, and the 2 burners and the lamp mantles if you want to read at night. Osborne fire finders in the middle of the floor. Don't set your coffee on it. It's older than both of us, and the district treats it like the Shroud of Turin. He downshifted, and the truck bucked over a water bar. Prior fella left it clean, I'll give him that. Prior fella, I said. How long was he up there? Del was quiet for the length of maybe 3 fence posts going by. Part of a season, he said. Last year. Left in August. How come? Personal, Del said, in a way that closed the door and nailed it. I let it go. I was good at letting things go when I did not want to hear the answer. That was another one of my talents. The road ended in a wide spot, with a wooden trail sign gone silver from weather. Del helped me get my pack and the resupply boxes onto my back and into my arms, and he pointed up the ridge where the trail switched back into the timber. 1.25 miles, he said. You'll see the tower before you're halfway. Take it slow with that load. And Wade. He looked at me with pale eyes that had gone a little wet the way old men's eyes do in wind. It's a good place to get your head right. A lot of quiet. Some fellas can't take the quiet. You seem like you can. I can take quiet, I said. It's noise I've had trouble with. He almost smiled. He got back in the truck and turned it around in 8 careful moves and drove off down the mountain, and the sound of the engine got smaller and smaller until the wind ate it. And then it was just me and the pack straps, cutting my shoulders and the trail going up. My knee started talking to me before the first switchback. I tore it up at the mill 4 years back. A chain broke, and a cant came off the deck and pinned my leg against a steel upright, and they put me back together with screws and a story about how lucky I was. On a grate it grinds. I could feel every one of those 120 stairs waiting for me at the top before I even saw the tower. When I did see it, through a gap in the larch, it did not look real. It looked like a toy left on a mountain by a giant child, a little glass box up on stilts of steel, catching the afternoon sun so the whole cab flared white like it was on fire. And I stood there sweating under my load and thought, I am going to live in that. I did not know yet what it means to live in a glass box. I did not know yet that a box you can see out of in every direction is also a box that anything can see into. The climb up the stairs about finished me. Open steel treads, you can see the ground dropping away between your boots, and by the top my knee was a hot wire and my hands were shaking on the rail. There was a trapdoor hatch in the floor of the catwalk that you push up and through, and then you're out on the walk that runs all the way around the cab and then the door into the cab itself. Inside it smelled of dust and propane and old wood, and the particular sun-baked tar smell of a place that gets hot as an oven every afternoon and cold as a root cellar every night. It was 1 room, a cot with a bear-striped mattress, a little table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, no bigger than a milk can, the 2-burner propane setup, and the fridge, shelves. The Osborne finder dead center on its own stand, a brass and steel ring with a map of the whole district under glass, and a sighting bar you swing around to shoot a bearing on a smoke, and glass. Glass on all 4 sides, floor to just below the ceiling, so that Standing in the middle of that room, you were standing in the middle of the sky. You could see Idaho. You could see, on a clear evening, the far blue wall of the Bitterroots, and range after range of the cabinets closer in, green going to gray, going to snow on the high ones, and the silver thread of the Kootenai River away down in the valley haze. It stopped my breath. I am not a man who says things like that, but it did. I found the register that first evening, a hardbound green ledger on the shelf, and I read it by lamplight while my supper heated. Lookouts had been signing that book for decades. Weather, smokes, visitors, the little daily nothings. A woman named Marge in the 70s who drew tiny pictures of birds in the margins. A college kid in the 2000s who quoted song lyrics. And then the previous year, last season's man, whose entries got shorter as the pages went on. Early on, he wrote whole paragraphs about elk in the meadow and a lightning storm that walked across 3 ranges. By August, his entries were 2 words: clear, nothing, clear, nothing, and then one that just said someone below, and then nothing at all. The rest of the pages blank, and Dell's own blocky hand at the very end, a single line dated the following week: lookout vacated, WC to close out season, set winterized. WC was the assistant or whoever. There was no explanation, just that gap where a man had been writing and then stopped. I read someone below 3 times, and then I told myself it meant a hiker, a hunter, some poor slob who wandered up the trail and gave a lonely man a start. I put the register back on the shelf. I ate my supper. I did not think about it again that night, or I told myself I didn't, which for me is the same thing. That was how it started, if you want to start. But nothing was wrong yet. For a while, nothing was wrong. I want to tell you about the days first, because the days were good, and because I need you to understand that I was happy up there before I was anything else, so you'll believe me later. I got a rhythm. Up at first light, which, in June, that far north, is before 5, and I would put the coffee on and stand at the east glass and watch the sun come up over the far ranges and throw the shadow of Copper Point out across the valley like a long dark finger. I would do the morning weather, dry bulb and wet bulb off the little sling psychrometer, wind by feel and by the way the trees moved, and I would write it in the register in my own hand, which is a cramped left-hand scrawl I have had since school. At 0900 I keyed the radio. Dispatch, lookout 7, morning check, clear and calm, nothing to report. And a voice, usually a young woman named Kayla down at the district office, would come back tinny and warm across all those miles of nothing. Copy 7, morning check, have a good one, Wade. And that was it. That was the whole of my human contact most days. 2 sentences, and I found I lived for them. I found I would rehearse what I was going to say, dress it up a little, make a joke about the mice, just to hear Kayla laugh her little static laugh. When you take everything away from a man, he will make a feast out of 2 sentences. Ruth on Bear Creek did talk my ear off, exactly like Dell said. She had been a lookout more than 30 years. She would key up in the dead middle of the afternoon when the heat sat on you and neither of us had a smoke to report, and she would tell me about her cats, all of whom were dead now, and her late husband, and the way the district used to run before it all went to computers. I let her. I liked it. Her voice down the valley was like a hand on the back of the neck. Afternoons, the cab got to be an oven, and I would go out on the catwalk in the shade side and read. I had a stack of paperback westerns I bought for $1 each at the thrift in Libby, Louis L'Amour mostly, the covers soft as cloth. I was working through one called The Daybreakers that summer, reading maybe 10 pages before I'd drift off in the chair with my hat over my face, my knee propped on the rail, the wind moving the pages. I would smoke half a cigarette and pinch it out. I did not drink because there was nothing to drink, and I will tell you the truth. After the first week of shaking and sweating and hating everything, I started to feel like a man again. My hands got steady. I slept. I ate. I lost the pouch of gut I had been carrying, and my face in the little shaving mirror stopped looking like a photograph of a drowned man. The thing I could not do was radio Emma. That was the deal. Nicole and I had it in writing, worked out through the lawyers, that I would schedule check-in calls with Emma over the season. There was a satellite phone in the resupply cache Dell brought up, a bulky thing in a Pelican case. And the arrangement was I would set a time by radio through the district, and Nicole would have Emma ready, and I would call and talk to my girl for 15 minutes twice a week. That was the whole point. Some of it. Prove I could keep a schedule. Prove I could show up for her, even from the top of a mountain, when I could not manage it from across town. I did not make the first call. I told myself the sat phone battery needed to charge in the sun. That was true, and it was also a lie. I did not make the second one. I told myself I would do it when I had something good to tell her, when I had a season under me, when I was a man she could be proud to talk to, instead of the one who scared her that last Christmas. I let the weeks go by. Every time the thought came up, it came up dressed as the guilt, and the guilt was so heavy that I would just set it down and walk away from it. Same as a bottle, same as everything. I was very good at setting heavy things down. There is a whole life of things I set down and walked away from, and my daughter was becoming one of them. Up there in that glass box where I could see 200 miles and could not make myself pick up a telephone. I am telling you this, so you know what I was carrying when the rest of it started. Because I have thought about it a lot since, and I believe a man who is already looking away from the one thing he ought to be looking at is easy to sneak up on. I had my back turned, not to the mountain, to myself. The first wrong thing was the boot prints. It had rained in the night, one of those short, hard June storms that comes up out of nowhere and hammers the cab and moves on. And the morning after, everything was washed clean and beaded with dew, and the metal stairs were dark with wet. I came out to do the morning weather, and I looked down the stairs the way you do, just to look, and there in the dew on the treads, about 10 steps down, were boot prints. Now the thing about that is I had not been down the stairs since the evening before, and the rain had come after that, so any print of mine would have been washed away. These were fresh. They were laid down after the rain quit, which by the clock in my head was somewhere in the small hours. And they were big. I wear a 10. These were bigger, a wide flat lug sole, and they came up the stairs, and they stopped. They did not turn around. That was the part I kept coming back to. They came up 8 or 10 steps out of the dark and the wet, and then there were no more of them, not going up and not going down, as if a man had climbed partway to my cab in the middle of the night and then stepped off the side of the tower into 100 feet of air. Of course, that is not what happened. What happened, I decided, standing there in my long johns with my coffee going cold, was that the higher stairs had dried faster, up in the wind, so his prints only showed on the lower wet ones. That was reasonable. That was almost certainly true. But he had come up in the night, in the rain, and he had gotten within 10 steps of the trapdoor and my sleeping self before he turned around, if he turned around. I told Ruth about it on the radio, keeping it light. Had a visitor in the night, I said. Boot prints on my stairs this morning, big ones. Some hunter get turned around up here? Ruth was quiet a second. Season's not open, she said. Nothing to hunt in June but trouble. Then she laughed and told me it was probably a Forest Service trail crew that camped low, and one of them hiked up on a dare to see the tower. Kids do it, and I said, yeah, probably, and we let it go. But I noticed, she took a second before she laughed. I noticed that, and I filed it, and I did not look at it. The next thing was the gate. There was a little gate at the top of the stairs where you come out onto the catwalk, chest high, a piece of steel mesh in a frame with a simple drop latch, and its whole job is to keep you from stepping backward off the walk into the stairwell in the dark. I latched it every night. It is a habit like locking a door. You do not even feel yourself do it. Your hand does it. One morning, about a week after the boot prints, I came out, and the gate was standing open, swung back on its hinge against the rail. Latch up. I stood there and I ran the tape back. I had latched it. I always latched it. But had I, last night, for certain? I could not swear to it the way you can never swear to the thing your hands do without you. The wind could have jarred it if the latch was worn. I went and looked at the latch, and it was not worn. It dropped into its slot with a solid little clunk, and it would take a hand to lift it, but I could not prove I had dropped it. So I stood there and I let the doubt do its work, which is the thing doubt is for, and I decided I must have forgotten, and I latched it, and I went and did my weather. I want to be honest about how this went, because I think it matters. Nothing that happened those first weeks would have stood up in front of another person. Boot prints that maybe just dried unevenly. A gate that maybe I forgot to latch. A line in a register a stranger wrote last year. Each single thing, held up by itself in the daylight, was nothing. Was a lonely man spooking himself in a quiet place. And that is exactly how it works. That is the whole mechanism of it. It comes at you in pieces small enough to explain away, and you explain each one away, and you are so busy being reasonable about the pieces that you never once step back and look at the shape they are making. I was reasonable about every single thing until it was too late to be reasonable about anything. The register was the third thing. I read my own entries most evenings, out of boredom and out of something like pride, watching the season build up in my own bad handwriting. And one night I turned back a few pages and found an entry I had not written. It was 3 days back in the afternoon slot where I would normally note weather. My entries that week said things like hot, high haze off the fires in Washington, no local smoke. This one, 3 days back, in a hand that was not mine but that was trying to be mine, that had my cramped lean and my habit of not crossing my sevens, said, quiet up here. He sleeps a lot. Left knee bothers him on the stairs. I read it maybe 6 times. The propane lamp hissed. The glass around me had gone black with night, so that I was sitting in a lit room floating in a sea of dark, and I could see myself reflected in all 4 walls, 4 Wades hunched over a green book, and beyond the 4 of us nothing, the reflection killing my view of the outside stone dead. I did not think about that yet. I was thinking about the handwriting. He sleeps a lot. Left knee bothers him on the stairs. Nobody knew about my knee. I had not told Ruth. I had not told Kayla. I had said nothing on the radio. The only way a person could know my knee bothered me on the stairs was to watch me climb them. To watch me, more than once, long enough to see it was the left one and to see it was the stairs that did it. And to come up into my cab while I was gone, or while I slept, and take my register off the shelf, and turn to the right page, and copy my hand well enough to nearly fool me, and put it back exactly where it was. I got up so fast I knocked the chair over. I went to the door, and I looked out at black glass, and my own scared face looking back at me, and I could not see one thing past it. Not a tree, not the stairs, not a light, nothing. Just Wade Corliss with his mouth open in a floating lamplit room 100 feet up in the dark. And it came to me all at once, the thing I had not let myself understand for 3 weeks, that at night, with the lamp on, I was the most visible thing on that whole mountain. That anybody out there, in that black, standing in the trees below, or on the stairs, or on the catwalk 2 feet away on the other side of the glass, could see me lit up bright as a store window, could watch every move I made, my face, my hands, the fear coming up in me, and I could see nothing of them at all. I was in a lit fishbowl, and the whole dark world was outside it looking in. I turned off the lamp. I did it without deciding to. My hand just did it, the way it latched the gate. And when the light went out, the reflections died, and the glass turned clear, and the mountains came back, blue-black under a half-moon, range on range, and the meadow below the tower a paler gray, and the black wall of timber at its edge, and everything was still and enormous and empty. I stood in the dark of my own cab, and I looked, and there was nobody. Of course there was nobody. Who would there be? I made myself breathe. I told myself a story about the register, that I had written it half asleep, that I write funny when I am tired, that he meant nothing, that a man alone talks about himself in the third person. Everybody knows that is practically a symptom of the job. I told myself that story, and I was still telling it when I lay down on the cot without lighting the lamp again, and I lay there a long time in the dark listening to the wind on the wires, and I did not sleep for hours. And when I finally did, I dreamed about the mill, the saw wine, the cant coming off the deck, my leg going, and I woke with my knee screaming and the sun already up. I did not write in the register for 2 days after that. I did not want to see my own handwriting. Then came the glint. I noticed it the way you notice a thing you have been seeing for a while before it registers. Late afternoon, the shade side of the catwalk, my western open on my knee, and down at the edge of the meadow where the timber started, maybe 200 yards off and a good bit downhill, there was a point of light in the dark of the trees. A hard white star of light, low down, in the shadow under the canopy, where there should not be any light at all. It would hold for a few seconds, and then it would move a little and hold again. I knew what it was because I had one on my own shelf. It was sunlight coming off a pair of binocular lenses. Somebody was standing in the tree line with a pair of glasses, and the glasses were pointed up. At the tower. At me. I did not move for a long time. I kept my hat tilted and my book up, and I watched that glint over the top of the pages, the way you watch a wasp you don't want to startle, and it held on me, and I could feel it on my skin, the way you can feel it when a person is looking at you across a room. Then a cloud came over and the glint went out, and when the cloud passed it did not come back, and the trees down there were just trees. I got up and I got my own binoculars, the district issue, heavy old rubber armored things, and I glassed the tree line where the glint had been. Timber, shadow, the pale trunks of a couple of dead snags. Down in the duff under the canopy the light was too poor to make out much, and I could not swear I saw anything move. But once, just once, low in the shadow, where a man might crouch, I thought I saw a paleness turn away, the paleness of a face turning from the light, and then it was gone, and I could not get it back, no matter how long I glassed. This one I radioed in for real. Not to Ruth, to the district, to Dell. I keyed up the evening check, and I did it flat and careful, because I did not want to sound like the kind of lookout who cracks up in July, the kind that gives the district a story to tell at the bar all winter. Dispatch, lookout 7, evening check. Clear, no smoke. And Dell, if he's around, I've got something for him. Non-emergency. There was a pause, and then Dell's own gravel came on. Go ahead, 7. I've had somebody hanging around below the tower, I said. Boot prints on my stairs a couple weeks back, bigger than mine. Some things moved around inside the cab when I had been down for water. And this afternoon I glassed a set of binoculars, and the tree line at the meadow edge pointed up at me, held on me a good while. There's a person camped below me, Dell, and they're watching the tower, and I'd like to know who and why. The radio hissed. I could picture Dell in the district office with his hat pushed back, scratching at that yellow mustache, deciding how much of me to believe. You get a look at him, he said. A face turning away, maybe. That's all. 200 yards in bad light. Could be a hunter scouting for fall, Dell said. Could be some backpacker likes to sit and look at the tower. We get those. People are funny about lookouts. Could be nothing, Wade. He said it kind. He was not writing me off, but he was not scared either, and I understood that his job was to not be scared over the radio at a man alone on a mountain. Tell you what. I'll send somebody up to have a look around when I can free a body. We're stretched thin with the fires down south pulling crews. Might be a few days. You got any reason to think this person means you harm? I thought about the register. He sleeps a lot. Left knee bothers him on the stairs. I did not tell him about the register. I do not know why I didn't. I think I was afraid that if I said it out loud in my flat, careful voice, it would sound exactly as crazy as it was, and I would hear Dell decide, right there over the air, that Copper Point had another lookout going wrong on him, the way the last one went wrong, whatever that was. No, I said, no reason. You swore on the record, and I'd take that visit when you can spare one. It's on the record, Dell said. Keep your gate latched and your eyes open, and holler if anything changes. I'll get a fella up there as soon as I'm able. Copy, I said. Lookout 7 clear. I put the mic down and I sat in the dark cab because I did not light the lamp anymore. I ate my supper cold, or by the little red glow of my headlamp on its dimmest setting turned to the wall, and I thought about the previous man. I got the register and I took it out onto the catwalk in the last of the daylight so I would not have to be lit up inside to read it, and I turned to his last entries. Clear. Nothing. Clear. Nothing. Someone below. And I understood, sitting there with the book on my knees and the cold coming up the valley, that he had seen the glint too, that he had written someone below, and then a week later he was gone off the mountain, and Dell would not say why, and the district treated the whole thing like a thing you fold up small and put away. And here I was on the same peak with the same someone below, and Dell was going to send a fella up in a few days. That night I found the camp. Not that night, but the next day, and I want to tell it right. I went down for water. That is the truth, and it is also the excuse I gave myself. The cistern was low from a dry stretch, and there is a spring about half a mile down the trail where you can fill jugs, and going for water was a legitimate reason to be off the tower and on the ground with my eyes open. But I will be honest. I went down to find him. I had it in my head that if I could see the camp, see it was some harmless old coot or some bird watcher, I could put the whole thing to bed and sleep again. I did not think it through past that. I took my water jugs and I took the binoculars and, God help me, I took the little hatchet from the wood box, and I told myself that was for clearing deadfall off the trail. I filled the jugs at the spring, and then instead of going back up I went sideways, off trail, contouring around the base of the ridge toward the meadow, toward where the glint had come from. My knee did not like the side hill. I went slow and quiet, or as quiet as a big man with a bad knee can go, and I came around through the timber above the meadow's lower edge, and I found it. It was a good camp. That was the first thing that hit me, that it was not a night stopover, but a place somebody had lived in a long time. A low tarp lean-to, the color of the forest floor, staked out and weather gray, guyed off tight, set back under the canopy where it would never show from the air or from the tower. A fire ring, old. The rocks smoke black, and the ash deep, weeks of ash. A cache hung in a tree, a food bag going up on a line the way you do for bears. And it was done right, done by somebody who knew the country. Cans stacked and flattened. A folding camp stool. And this camp was placed with care, placed so that if you sat on that stool at the open front of the lean-to, you were looking straight up the slope through a gap in the trees, a gap that had been cut, branches sawed and the cuts gone brown, a shooting lane of sight, and at the top of that lane, framed in it like a picture, small and bright and floating, was the cab of Copperpoint, my cab. I could see the catwalk. I could see, and this is the thing that put the cold all through me, I could see my own laundry, a shirt I had hung on the rail that morning, moving a little in the wind, 200 yards up, and clear as anything through that cut lane. On the camp stool, on a little tripod, was a pair of binoculars, big ones, and they were pointed up the lane, at the tower, left there, aimed and left there, the way you leave a thing set up because you come back to it many times a day. I did not touch anything at first. I stood at the edge of the little clearing with my heart going and my ears roaring, and I looked and looked for the man, and he was not there. The camp was empty. Wherever he was not in it, and the not knowing where he was, with me standing in his camp holding his binoculars in my eyes now, that was worse than if he had been sitting on the stool. I put the glasses down. I made myself breathe, and I looked closer, because I am not a smart man, but I am a stubborn one, and I wanted to know. There was a beam. The lean-to had a ridgepole, a stout dead lodgepole he had cut and set, and low down on one of the uprights that held it, down where you would only see it if you crouched at the open front of the shelter and looked left, there was writing scratched into the wood, not scratched by him, older, silvered, cut with a knife point into the dead wood by somebody a while back and weathered since. 2 letters and then some words. The letters were T and R, and under them, cut deeper, gone into the wood hard the way you cut when you mean it, 3 words. He watches you. TR. I thought about the register. I did not have the previous man's name. Dell never said it. But the sign outline said WC to close out, and the last real entries were his, and I thought TR. And I thought about a man last summer sitting where I was standing, finding this same camp, crouching at this same shelter, cutting his own initials and a warning into the wood for whoever came next, and then hiking off the mountain and never being talked about again. He left it here for me. He left it here so that whoever manned Copper Point after him would find this camp and read those 3 words and understand what the district and the reasonable daylight would never let them understand, which was that it was true, that there really was a man in the trees, that he had been here before and he was here now and he would be here after, and that he watches you. I want to tell you, I went back up the tower and radioed it all in cool and clear. I did radio it. But first I did a thing I am not proud of, and that I understand better now than I did then. I stood in that camp, and I got angry. The old mill-yard anger. The anger that used to walk me into bars and out of marriages, and I wanted to wreck the place, kick down the lean-to, throw his binoculars into the rocks, put the hatchet into his cache line, make him know that I had been here, that I was not the last man, that I would not fold up small and hike off the mountain like whoever TR was. I got the hatchet halfway out of my belt, and then I thought, if I wreck his camp, he knows I found it. Right now, he does not know. Right now, wherever he is, he thinks I am up in my box being watched. That is the only card I have that he does not know I know. And so I did the hard thing, which for me is always the doing of nothing, and I put the hatchet away, and I took nothing, and I moved nothing. I even stepped back, careful over my own tracks, and I went back around the side hill on my sore knee with my water jugs, and I climbed my 120 stairs, feeling the whole way up that shooting lane on the back of my neck, feeling watched, wondering if he was in the trees right now watching me climb, seeing my left knee catch on the stairs the way he had written it in my own book. I latched the gate. I did not light the lamp. I sat in the dark and I keyed the radio and I told Dell all of it, the camp, the cut sight lane, the binoculars on the tripod, the initials and the words in the wood. I told him about the register this time too, the entry that was not mine, the knee. I heard my own voice getting up out of flat and careful into something with an edge on it, and I could not stop it. Dell listened all the way through. When I was done, there was a long hiss. TR, Dell said, slow. And then he did not explain it, but I heard him decide something. I heard the change in his voice, the reasonable daylight going out of it. All right, Wade. All right. I hear you. This is more than a hunter. I'm going to get the sheriff's office looped in. This is county law now, not just Forest Service. But I want you to understand something, and I want you to stay calm while I say it. It is going to take time to get bodies up that trail. It's dark in a few hours. Nobody's hiking 1.25 miles up a rock ridge in the dark to Copper Point tonight. It can't be done safe. And I won't send men to break their legs in the dark over this first light. I will have people on that trail at first light. Can you get through the night? The night. He said it, and I felt the whole size of it come down on me. The hours of dark between now and first light, alone, 100 feet up in a glass box on a mountain, with a man in the trees who had watched 2 of us now and driven one off and left the other a warning cut in wood. I can get through the night, I said. Latch everything, Dell said. That hatch in your floor, the trapdoor, can you block it? I looked at it. The trapdoor in the catwalk floor that you come up through, the only way onto the walk short of climbing the outside of the tower. It had no lock. It was just a hinged square of steel checkered plate that dropped shut over the stairwell. I can put weight on it, I said. Wood box, water jugs, my cot if I have to. Do it, Dell said. Do it now, while there's light. And Wade, you've got that radio. I'm going to have somebody on the district set all night. You key up any time, for any reason. You hear a mouse fart wrong, you key up and there'll be a voice. You are not alone up there, even if it feels like it. First light. You hold on till first light. Copy, I said. My voice came out small. Lookout 7. I blocked the hatch while there was still light. I dragged the wood box over onto it. and then the 2 full water jugs on top of the wood box, and then I dragged the little table over and turned it upside down and jammed its legs against the box so it could not slide. It was not much. A determined man could push it up if he was strong and did not mind the noise. But it was what I had, and the noise was the point. The noise would wake me. The noise would be my alarm. Then I sat down in the dark to wait for the night. I have thought a lot about those hours since. I have thought about how quiet it was at first, how ordinary, how I sat there in the dark cab as the last blue drained out of the west, and the stars came up hard and cold the way they only do that far from any town. More stars than the city man believes in. And how for a while I let myself think that maybe nothing would happen, that Dell was right. That first light would come and bring men up the trail, and this would be a story I told. The summer, a crazy hermit spooked me on a fire tower. I even dozed. I am ashamed of that, but it is true. The body does what it does, and I had not slept right in days, and somewhere around midnight I nodded off in the chair with my headlamp in my lap and my back to the west glass. The stairs woke me. There is a sound a steel stair makes when a foot comes down on it, a specific ring, a note. In the day I made that sound a dozen times and never heard it. In the dead middle of that night, dead quiet, dead still, the wind having laid down the way it does before dawn, I heard it come up from below through the blocked hatch, one ring, and then a pause, and then another ring, higher, closer, slow, a foot, and a pause, and a foot. Somebody was coming up my stairs in the dark, and they were doing it slow, so slow, one tread at a time, and the slowness was the worst of it, because a man in a hurry is a man who is scared or careless, but a man coming up 120 steel stairs, one slow ring at a time in the black, is a man who has all the time in the world and knows exactly where he is going. I did not move. I sat in the chair with my heart slamming, and I listened to him come up. I got my headlamp on, but I did not turn it on. I did not make a sound. The steps came up and got close and stopped, and I knew by the closeness that he was at the top of the stairs now, on the little landing right under the hatch, right under the wood box and the water jugs and the upside-down table, 2 feet below the soles of my boots. And then something pushed up against the hatch. Not hard. That was what undid me. That it was not hard, that it was gentle, testing. A slow, steady pressure up against the underside of the trapdoor, feeling it, feeling the weight I had put on it, learning it. The jug shifted a 1/4 inch, and the water in them slopped, and the checker plate of the hatch lifted maybe a hair against the wood box and stopped. He was testing whether he could get through. He was doing it slow and quiet so as not to wake me, which meant he did not know I was already awake, already sitting 2 feet away in the dark with my whole body ringing, and that was the only thing I had. That he did not know, and I sat on it and did not breathe. The pressure came off. The hatch settled, and I heard him, very soft, right there under me, make a sound. It was not words. It was a kind of low sound in the chest, a satisfied sound, the sound a man makes to himself when a thing is going the way he wants. And then the stairs rang again, but not going down, going around. He was climbing the last bit, the outside of the frame, coming up onto the catwalk the other way, over the rail maybe, or up the corner brace, because a man who has lived under this tower all summer would know every way up it there was, and the hatch was only one of them, and I had blocked the one and forgotten the rest. He was on the catwalk. He was outside the glass. I heard his weight come onto the walk, the whole tower taking it, a tremor you feel more than hear. And then footsteps, slow, going around the cab on the walk, and I sat frozen in my chair in the black, and I watched the glass. The moon was up, a half moon, enough, and against it, against the pale night sky and the dark ranges, I saw him pass the west glass. A shape, a man shape, big, broad, moving slow along the catwalk with one hand on the rail, and he stopped at the west glass and he put his face to it. I could see the shape of the head against the sky, turned in, looking in, cupping, I think, his hands to the glass to see past his own reflection, because on his side the night was bright and the cab was dark, and now it was reversed. Now I was the one hidden in the dark box, and he was the one lit against the sky, and he could not see me, and I could see him. I sat still as stone. He moved along to the next glass, the south, and put his face to that. He was looking for me. He was going window to window around my cab in the dark, looking for where I was. And I understood that I had to not be where he expected. I had to not be lit. I had to not be in the cot where a sleeping man would be. And I slid off the chair down onto the floor by the Osborne stand, down low in the deepest dark, and I stayed there. He came all the way around. West, south, east, north, his face at every glass, slow, patient. And twice I heard him make that low chest sound, and once, at the east glass, he stopped for a long time. A long, long time. His forehead against the glass, and his hands cupped, staring into the dark of my cab not 4 feet from where I lay on the floor with the hatchet in my fist, and my own pulse deafening me. And I do not know to this hour whether he saw me or not. Whether he was looking right at me and could not make me out, or whether he was looking at the empty cot and wondering. And the not knowing stretched out so long I thought I would scream, just to end it. Then the moon came clear of a thin cloud, and for about 2 seconds it lit him. I saw his face. I have to tell you I saw it because it is the thing I have left. It was an old face and a young face at once, a weathered outdoor face gone brown and creased as a saddle, with a full gray beard grown wild and matted, and the eyes, the moon caught the eyes, and they were pale gray or pale blue, and they were open too wide, fixed, the eyes of a man looking at the only thing in the world that matters to him, and they were fixed on the dark where I lay, and his mouth under the beard was moving. He was talking, soft, through the glass, so soft I got only the shape of it, and not the sound, and I could not hear the words, but I did not need to, because I could read the one word. His mouth kept making over and over against the glass, gentle and coaxing. The way you talk to a spooked animal you mean to get a rope on. Wade. He knew my name. Nobody had told him my name. He had gotten it the way he got the knee. By watching, by listening, maybe to my radio calls, carrying down the mountain on a still night. Lookout 7, this is Wade. And he had taken my name into that camp under the trees and made it his. And now he was standing on my catwalk in the dark saying it, through the glass, gentle as anything. Wade, Wade, come on now, Wade. And the moon went behind the cloud and took his face away, and left just the shape of him with his hand on the glass. I did not scream. I do not know where I found it, but I did not. I lay on the floor by the Osborne, and I made myself think. The radio. The radio was on the shelf above the cot, and to get to it I would have to cross in front of the north glass where he was now, and to key it I would have to make sound. And the second he heard my voice he would know exactly where I was, and there was one thin pane of old glass between his hands and me. But Dell said there would be a voice all night. Dell said key up for any reason. I crawled for the radio. I went low and slow across the floor, dragging my bad leg, and I got under the cot, and I reached up and got my hand on the set, and I pulled it down off the shelf into the dark with me, the coiled cord paying out. And I got the mic, and I turned the volume down to almost nothing so his answer would not blast out and tell the man where I was. And I keyed it, and I put my mouth right against it, and I breathed the words as quiet as a man can and still make words. Dispatch 7. He's on my catwalk. He's on the tower right now, right outside the glass. Get somebody. He's here. He's here right now. There was the little crackle of the set answering, and I clamped it against my chest to smother it, and a voice came. Tiny, a night dispatcher, a man, saying copy. 7 units are hours out. Hold on. Can you barricade? And I could not answer because the shape at the north glass had gone still. He had heard something. Maybe the crackle. Maybe nothing. Maybe he just sensed it the way an animal senses it. He went still, and then his head turned, slow, tracking, and I watched his shape at the glass turn and start to move along the walk toward the door. The door. The cab door had a hook latch, a little brass hook and an eye, a thing to keep the wind from banging it, not a thing to keep a man out. And He was going for the door now. I could hear his hand come onto it, the knob turning, the door pushing in against the little hook, the hook pulling at its screws, and I knew the hook would not hold. 3 screws in old wood against a big man leaning. It would not hold for 10 seconds. And I made the decision that saved my life, if it was saved, and I have never been sure the decision was brave so much as it was just the last card I had. I decided I could not stay in the box. The box was a trap. The box had glass on 4 sides and 1 hook on the door and a hatch a strong man could shove through. The box was where he wanted me. The box was the thing he had been watching all summer. The man in the box. If I stayed in the box, I was the man in the box, and the man in the box was his. I had to not be in the box. I went for the hatch. While he leaned on the door on the north side of the cab, I came up off the floor, and I threw the table and the water jugs and the wood box off the trapdoor, and I did not care now about the noise. The noise did not matter now, and I heaved the hatch up and open, and I went down into the black stairwell on my hands and knees and bad leg, feeling for the treads, and above me, I heard the hook let go and the door bang open, and I heard him come into my empty cab, and I heard him make a sound that was not the low, satisfied sound anymore, a different sound, a high, thin sound of a man who has come to a thing and found it not there, and I went down those stairs in the dark faster than a man with my knee has any right to, 1 hand on the rail, feet finding the treads by faith, down and down, the whole tower ringing with me now, no point in quiet, just down, and above me I heard him find the open hatch and come after me. I have run from things in my life. I ran from Nicole, I ran from Emma, I ran from every hard thing I ever should have stood and faced. I want you to know that this once, I did not so much run from a thing as run at a thing, because down at the bottom of those stairs was the trail, and the trail went down the ridge 1.25 miles to where the road ended. And at the road end, I remembered I had seen when Dell dropped me off weeks ago, there was nothing, no vehicle, just the trailhead. But I also remembered that Dell said units were coming, and units come by road, and if I could get down that trail to the road end, I would at least be on ground where help could reach me, off the mountain, out of the box, on the trail, with the man behind me instead of above me. So down I went, and off the bottom of the tower onto the ground, and my knee buckled, and I went down in the rocks, and got up and went into the black timber, onto the trail, downhill, and behind me and above me I heard him come off the tower too. The moon helped. It was low, but it was there, and my eyes had been in the dark for hours, and the trail was a pale line in the black timber, and I ran it more than walked it. Downhill, my knee a bright bar of pain with every step, my breath tearing, my western in my back pocket, God knows why, and the hatchet in my hand. And behind me he came. He did not call my name now. He came quiet again, but not slow. And every so often when I stopped to listen for him, I heard him. A footfall. The click of a rock, closer than I wanted. Then farther, then closer. And I understood he knew this trail better than me. He had lived on this mountain the whole summer, and maybe more. And the only thing I had on him was that I was going down hard and desperate, and he, I think, still wanted something out of me alive, still wanted the man from the box, and a man who wants you alive is slower than a man who is only running. There is a stretch where the trail crosses a scree slope, open, moonlit, no trees, and I hated to cross it because on it I would be lit up and visible, the man in the open now instead of the man in the box. But there was no way around, and I went across it fast and low. And in the middle of it, I looked back. I could not help it. And I saw him come out of the timber, onto the top of the scree, up the slope, a black shape against the pale rock. And he stopped there when he saw me in the open, and he stood, and he did not come down after me across the open. He just stood at the tree line and watched me go, the way he had watched me all summer. from the trees, and that was the last I saw of him, a black shape at the edge of the timber, holding still, watching, letting me go, or unwilling to come into the open. I will never know which. I got across the scree and into the trees on the far side, and down the last of the ridge, with my lungs on fire. And I came out at the road end, where the wooden sign stood silver in the moon, and there was no vehicle. Of course, there was no vehicle. And I did not stop. I went down the road itself, the two ruts and the spine of rock, downhill in the dark. And I do not know how far I went. A mile, two, my knee gone from pain into a kind of numb wrongness, before I saw headlights coming up. It was the sheriff, two deputies, and a county bronco, coming up the road faster than Dell said anybody could, because a night dispatcher had heard a man breathing, "He's here," into a radio, and had not waited for first light after all. They about ran me over. I stood in the headlights in my long johns and one boot. I had lost a boot somewhere and never felt it. Go with a hatchet in my hand and blood on my knee, and I could not talk for a while. I just stood in the light and shook, and one of the deputies got out and put a blanket on me and kept saying, you're all right, we got you." And I remember thinking, the way you think a stupid, clear thing at a time like that I was standing in the light again, lit up in the dark for anybody to see, and that this time I did not care. This time the light was on my side. They went up in the morning, a whole crew, deputies, and Forest Service, and Dell himself, up the trail to Copper Point. I did not go. My knee was done. They took me down to the hospital in Libby, and I sat in a bed and answered the same questions 8 times. When Dell came to see me, he had his hat in his hands and his mustache looked whiter. "They found the camp," he said. "Found it right where I said, the lean-to and the sight lane cut through the trees, and the fire ring deep with ash and the beam with the letters in it. But it was cleared out. The tarp gone, the binoculars gone, the cache gone, the camp stripped down to the fire ring and the flat black rocks, and the cut branches going brown. As if a man had spent 1 hour in the night breaking down a camp he had lived in all summer and carried it off on his back into 100 square miles of the Cabinet Mountains, which is exactly, I think, what he did. They tracked him a ways up over a saddle to the north and lost him on rock. Big boots, wide flat lug sole, bigger than a 10. They never got him. As far as I know, they never have." Dell stood there, turning his hat, and finally he told me about TR. Travis Renner was the previous year's lookout, the man whose initials were cut in the beam, and Dell said Travis had come off the mountain in August of the year before, saying there was a man watching him, a man living below the tower, and the district had Dell's word, mishandled it. Nobody believed Travis. They wrote him up as unstable, a lookout who cracked in the solitude, it happens, and they closed the season and did not talk about it, and Travis went off and Dell did not know where. And Dell, and I will give the old man this, Dell looked at me with his wet pale eyes, and he said he was sorry. He said, I sent you up there and I knew what Travis said, and I decided Travis was crazy because it was easier, and I am sorry, Wade. I do not get many apologies from men like Dell, and I remember that one. They think he was somebody who had been living in that country a long time, off the grid, a survivalist or a broke-down veteran, or just a man who had walked away from the world, and that the lookout lit up in its glass box on the peak. One man alone, night after night, had become the thing he watched, the way a man alone will fix on a light in a window across a valley. Whether he meant to hurt me or only to be near me, to have the man in the box, I do not know, and I have decided I do not want to know, because both of the answers I can imagine are things I would rather not carry. I called Emma from the hospital. I want you to know that. 3rd day in, my knee up in a sling. I got the nurse to bring me a phone, and I called Nicole's house, and Emma answered, and I talked to my daughter for the first time all summer. I did not tell her any of it. I told her about the mountains, and the stars, and the mice in the cab, and a marmot that used to sit on the catwalk rail. And she laughed, and I closed my eyes and listened to her laugh. And it was the first thing all season that got all the way through me. I should have called in June. I know that I am the kind of man who learns the thing about a year after it would have done him any good. I am back in Libby now. I got on at a different mill, over in the planer, days only. I do not drink. Most days, I still roll my cigarettes and smoke half and pinch them out. And there are two things I cannot do, and I do not fight them anymore. I just live around them the way you live around a bad knee. I cannot sleep in a room with an uncurtained window. Nicole would call it foolish, and she would be right, and I do not care. If there is glass with the dark on the other side of it, I have to cover it, a blanket, a towel, tacked up, before I can lie down, because I cannot stand to be the lit thing in the box with the dark outside looking in, and no amount of telling myself the difference has ever once made the difference stop. And the other thing is the glint. It can be anything. Sun off a windshield in a parking lot, off a window across the street, off a pair of glasses on a man's face in a bar. A hard little white star of light, low, in a place where there is shadow. And every time, before I can think, before I can be a reasonable man about it, my whole body goes to stone, and my eyes go to the tree line that is not there, and I wait for it to hold on me. And I feel it on my skin the way you feel it when a person is looking at you across a room. And I am back on the catwalk in the shade with my western on my knee and the light holding in the dark under the trees. Sun off a truck window this morning in the mill lot, low and white and holding. Story 3. The Cedars. The coffee went cold in the cup holder before we hit the county line, and I let it, because pouring a fresh one meant stopping, and stopping meant standing in the gravel lot of the Amboy Highway store, with my hand on the pump and no reason to hurry, and I did not want that. Danny was asleep against the window with his mouth open, the way he had slept in the back of Dad's truck when we were kids, and I kept the radio low so I would not wake him. There was nothing on it anyway. Up here past Amboy, the FM turns to hiss, and the AM turns to a preacher. And after a while, I shut it off and drove in the quiet, with the heater ticking and the wipers dragging across a windshield that did not have enough on it to warrant them. I left them on anyway. The sound was company. It was the 3rd of November, 2019, and it was the first year we were doing camp without my father. I want to say that plain so I do not have to keep coming back to it. Wally Keever died in April, in the recliner, watching a fishing show, with a plate of crackers and summer sausage on the arm of the chair and the dog at his feet. Heart. Fast, the doctor said, like that was a mercy, and maybe it was, but it did not feel like one to me, because there was no last anything, no last conversation. He was there, and then he was a thing my brother and I carried out to the funeral home's van in the rain, and the crackers were still on the chair arm when I came back for the dog. And I ate them standing up in his kitchen because I could not think of what else to do with them. 44 years old, and I ate my dead father's crackers over the sink like a raccoon. That is the kind of thing you do not tell anybody. Camp was his. Understand that. The cabin off the 2-track in Moreno County, the plank walls he and my Uncle Gene had put up before I was born, the wood stove with the crack in the top plate that you had to know about so you did not set a pot wrong and slop it, the antlers screwed to the ridge beam, the smell of it, which was creosote and old smoke and mouse and canvas, and underneath all of that, him, deer season, was the 1 week a year the whole thing turned on. He planned it in August. He called me in September to make sure I had put in for the days at the mill. He was the one who kept the propane topped and the road brushed out and the mice mostly at bay, and now he was not, and here I was doing it, and I did not know if I was doing it because I wanted to, or because leaving it undone felt like burying him a second time. I work at the mill. Paper. 21 years. My shoulder is bad from it, the right one, from a lifetime of pulling and reaching on the wet end, and in the cold it talks to me, a deep ache that lives under the joint and comes up the back of the neck, and driving that morning it was talking plenty. I had a can of Copenhagen in my coat, and I was not going to open it because I had quit in September again, and I had made it near 2 months, which was a record for me since I was 19. I could feel the can there against my ribs like a tooth you keep touching with your tongue. I told myself I would get through camp without it. I did not believe me. But I told myself, Danny woke up when the pavement quit, The 2-track starts about 4 miles in off the county road, and you feel the change in your spine before you feel it in the wheel, the washboard giving way to ruts and root, and the truck starting to walk side to side. He sat up and worked his jaw and looked out at the tag alders, scraping the mirror, and said, "You could have got me at the store." He meant the coffee. He always wants the coffee. "You were dead," I said, and then I heard it, the word, and neither of us said anything for a second, and Danny looked out his window, and I looked out mine, and the tires ground on. Danny is 39, 5 years under me. He drives a delivery route for a beer distributor out of Marquette, and he has 2 girls and an ex-wife, who is not a bad person, just done, and he lives in an apartment where the girls come every other weekend, and he sleeps on a futon so they can have the bed. He is softer than me in the belly, and softer than me in general, which I do not mean as an insult. He cried at the funeral, and I did not, and I have thought since that his way was the better way, and mine was the sickness. He carries Dad's old 30-30 now, the Marlin with the worn receiver, because I took the 30-06, and that was a conversation we did not really have, just a thing that happened. Me reaching for the Springfield in the cabinet the night after the funeral, and Danny watching me do it, and then reaching for the Marlin, and that was that. The oldest takes the deer rifle. It is stupid, and I am not sorry. Gene and Petey were coming up separate in Gene's Bronco, and they beat us there, which meant Gene had driven like a man half his age, which he does, which is a thing his cardiologist and his wife and everybody who loves him has told him to quit, which he will not. Gene is my father's younger brother, and with Dad gone, he is the oldest Kiever now, 67, and he wears it. He has the heart thing too, the family thing, the thing that took my father and my grandfather and will most likely take Danny and me in our turn. And he has a little brown bottle of nitro tablets in his shirt pocket that he taps sometimes without seeming to know he is doing it. He is the one who knows the camp. He is the one who knows the stories. My father told stories about people, about who shot what, and who fell in the creek, and who got lost in 58, and had to be walked out by lantern, but Gene tells the older ones, the ones from before us, the logging camp ones, and I will get to those. Petey LaRoche is not blood, but he is family, the way a man can be, who has been at your table since before you can remember. He and my father trapped together as young men. He is maybe 70 and does not look it, wiry and brown and quiet, and he still runs a small line up on the state land, and he knows the woods around the camp better than any of us, better than Gene even, and that matters later, so hold on to it. And there was Duke, the Choco Lab, Dad's dog technically, though after April he became mine because somebody had to feed him and Danny's apartment did not allow dogs. Duke was 9 and gray in the muzzle, and he had spent every deer season of his life at that camp, and when we pulled up, he was already out of Gene's Bronco and losing his mind in the yard. That whole body wag, the front half down and the back half going. And Danny got out and got a face full of dog and laughed, and I stood by the truck and let the 2 of them have it, and for a minute it was all right. For a minute it was just camp. Wood smoke already going, Gene's Bronco parked crooked the way he parks, Petey up on the cabin roof already, at his age, sweeping the season's needles off, the flashing with a push broom, 'cause that is who he is, and the light coming down through the tamaracks gone gold, and the cedars behind them black-green and close. I want to stay there a minute, in that part, because that is the part I did not know to hold on to while it was happening. You never do. You are inside the good hour, and you are thinking about the cold coffee, or your shoulder, or the mice, and you do not know that this is the last time the 5 of you, 4 of us, and the dog will stand in that yard with nothing wrong, and that in a handful of days 2 of the 5 will be gone, and a 3rd will carry the marks of it under his shirt for the rest of his life. If I had known, I would have looked harder. I would have put it all somewhere I could get at it later. Instead, I have to build it back out of scraps, the crooked Bronco, the wood smoke, Petey up on the roof with the push broom, Danny down in the dirt with the dog, the specific gold of that light coming through the tamaracks, and I am never sure how much of it is true and how much I have added because I needed it to be there. Danny got the fire in the smokehouse going that afternoon, just to have it, not that we had anything to smoke yet, and he and I stood by it with our hands out to the little heat while Jean napped and Petey did whatever Petey does off in the trees. And Danny asked me if I was doing all right, and I said I was fine, and he let it go, which is the Kiever way. You ask once and you take the lie and you let it go, and we stood by the smokehouse fire and did not talk about our father, who had built the smokehouse, whose hands had set every stone of the little chimney we were warming ourselves against, and that was as close as either of us got all week to saying any of it out loud. We opened camp the way we always did. There is an order to it, shutters down and stacked, mousetraps checked, and there were 3 sprung and 1 occupied, and I dealt with that and swept the droppings and put the traps back. Water on, which means priming the hand pump at the sink until it catches and coughs and runs rust and then clear. Propane checked. Stove built up, and the stove is a whole thing, because you have to know it, the crack in the top plate, the way the damper sticks, the specific split of the specific wood that Petey and Jean laid up under the tarp last year and the year before, because you burn last year's wood and split this year's for next, always. That was Dad's rule, and I found myself repeating it out loud to nobody as I laid the fire. You burn last year's and split this year's, and Danny heard me and did not say anything, which was kind. We had venison from Danny's freezer, backstrap from a deer he took the year before, and Jean made it on the stove in a cast pan with onions and too much butter, and we ate it with white bread, and it was as good as anything I have had in a restaurant, better. And Jean told the story about my father and the outhouse and the porcupine, which everybody knew, and everybody laughed in the right places. And Petey topped everybody's cup with the whiskey he brings that is not good whiskey, but is the right whiskey. And Duke lay under the table with his chin on my boot and sighed the way old dogs do. And there was a hole in the room the exact size and shape of my father, and every one of us saw it, and none of us said it, and that was right too. You do not say it. You let it sit in the empty chair, which we left empty, at the end of the table by the window, which was where he sat, and you pour the man a finger of Petey's bad whiskey, and you set it in front of the empty chair, and nobody drinks it, nobody explains it, and that is the whole religion of a deer camp. That is all the church there is, and if you do not understand it, I cannot make you. I went out on the step before bed with the can of Copenhagen in my hand, and I turned it over twice, and I put it back in my coat unopened, and I stood there in the cold and listened. That is the first thing I noticed, though I did not know it was a thing yet. It was quiet, not the quiet of no sound, the quiet of the wrong absence. In November, the cedar swamp is not silent. There are deer moving at last light, and after you hear them, the careful crunch and pause and crunch, and the little stuff, mice and shrews under the leaves, and the owls start up. The barred owl with its "Who cooks for you?" and sometimes far off a pack of coyotes will get going and set the hair up on your arms in a way that is almost pleasant because you know what it is. And that night there was none of it. There was the fire's exhaust smell, and the cold, and the tamaracks ticking as they let go, the day's warmth, and under all of it, a stillness that had weight, that pressed. And I stood in it long enough to notice it, and then I told myself I was tired and grieving and hearing my own blood. And I went in, and I did not sleep well, and in the morning I did not think about it at all. The deer were gone. I do not mean we did not see deer. I mean the woods had emptied out. Opening morning I sat Dad's old ladder stand on the east ridge, the one that looks down into the cedars where the 2 runs cross, the honey hole, the one you draw straws for. Except this year nobody drew because I just took it. Oldest takes the deer rifle and the deer stand, and I sat that stand from black dark to near 10, and I did not see a deer, did not hear a deer, did not so much as see a squirrel work a limb, I saw a raven go over once, high, not calling, just going quick and straight like it had somewhere to be. That was all. You can have a slow morning. Everybody has slow mornings. But this was the honey hole, and I have sat it 100 times. In Dad's lap when I was small, and beside him when I was bigger, and alone when I was grown, and I had never once sat it and seen nothing. There is always something. A doe and her yearlings working the cedars, turkeys, somebody's dog. The woods are never empty. And that morning they were swept, and I climbed down at 10 with my bad shoulder screaming from the cold and the sitting, and I walked the run down into the cedars to see what I could see, and that is where I found the first track. It was in the black muck at the edge of a seep, where little water comes up even in November and keeps the ground soft, and it was a canine track, and it was the size of my spread hand. I put my hand next to it, and my fingers did not reach the width of it. I have seen wolf tracks. We have wolves up here, real ones. They came back years ago, and the DNR pretends there are fewer of them than there are, and a big wolf will leave a print the size of your palm, 4 toes, and the pads and the nails showing because a wolf does not retract like a cat. And this was that shape, that arrangement, 4 toes in the big central pad, but it was half, again, bigger than any wolf track I have seen, and the nails had gone in deep, deeper than weight alone, like the thing had dug in to push off. And the stride, when I found the next one and paced it, the stride was long, too long. I am 6 foot, and my walking stride is not that. I stood between the 2 prints, and I could not have touched both without going up on my toes and reaching. I told myself, bear. A bear's front foot in soft mud can smear and spread and print bigger than the foot that made it. I told myself that walking back to the cabin, and I half believed it, and I did not tell the others at lunch because there was no reason to. Because it was a track in the mud, and I am a grown man and not a boy at a campfire, and because Danny had come in grinning about a stand of oaks he had found that was raining acorns, and I did not want to step on that. But I watched Duke. Duke would not leave the cabin yard. This is a dog who lived to hunt, who at 9 still shivered and whined at the sight of a gun coming down off the rack, who had spent every November of his life ranging out ahead of us on the walk to the stands and coming back muddy and satisfied, and that first full day he would not go past the wood pile. Danny tried to bring him along toward the oaks in the afternoon, and Duke got to the edge of the yard where the 2-track goes into the trees, and he stopped, and he would not be called, and he would not be dragged. He set all 4 feet and leaned back against the collar, and he made a sound low in his chest. I had not heard him make, and Danny gave up, and Duke came back to the step and lay down against the door and would not be coaxed off it. He faced the tree line. All day and into the dark he faced the tree line, and he did not sleep so much as lie there with his eyes open and his ears working, and every so often that low sound would start up in him again. Not a growl exactly, more like the sound a dog makes in a dream, except he was awake. That evening the wind came around out of the northwest and brought the smell. I was on the step again, the can in my hand, quitting, and the wind shifted, and I got it full in the face, and my stomach turned before my mind caught up. It was roadkill. It was the specific smell of a deer, 3 days dead in a July ditch. That sweet rot that gets in the back of your throat and stays, and under it and through it a wet dog smell, a kennel smell, a smell like a big dog that has been out in the rain and rolled in something and come in to lie by the stove. Roadkill and wet dog on a clean, cold northwest wind. In November, when there is nothing dead within a mile that I knew of, and no dog but Duke, who was at my feet, who had come up off the step onto his feet, with his hackles standing in a ridge from his shoulders to his tail, and was staring out into the black with a string of drool coming off his lip, and that dream sound going in him, low and steady now, not stopping. I went in and shut the door. I latched it, which we never do. Jean looked up from the stove and saw my face and did not ask. And I sat down, and after a while my heart came back to normal, and I told myself the wind had crossed a gut pile from some other party's deer. That was all. There are other camps within a few miles if you go by the Crow, and a warm day can turn a gut pile fast. And that was the smell. And Duke smelled it too. And dogs are dramatic, and I almost believed that one all the way. Almost. I did not tell the others about the smell either. I want to be honest about that. Because it matters. Because there is a version of this where I say something that first night, where I stand up in the cabin and say, there is a smell out there, and the deer are gone, and the dog will not leave the step, and something is wrong. And maybe if I had made the case early, before it had gone as far as it went, maybe Jean lives, maybe Duke lives. But I did not, and I have gone over why, and the truth is not flattering. It is that I did not want to be the man who was afraid. It is that my father had run that camp for 40 years and never once been afraid of the woods, or never once showed it, which is not the same thing but looks the same from a bunk across the room. And I was in his chair now. I was trying to be him, and being him meant not being the man who latches the door and jumps at a smell on the wind. So I ate the fear and I kept it down, and I told myself stories about gut piles, and I let the week roll on toward the thing it was rolling toward. And I have had a long time to sit with what that pride cost, and it does not get lighter, it just gets more familiar, which people confuse for the same thing. Petey did not sleep in the cabin that night. He said he liked the truck bed with the topper, said the cabin was too warm for him, and he took Duke out with him, and I heard him talking low to the dog through the wall, the way you talk to a spooked horse. And in the morning his eyes had the look of a man who had lain awake listening. And when I asked him if he heard anything, he said, "Coyotes." But he did not look at me when he said it. And Petey LaRoche is a man who looks at you. The second full day is when it started to line up in a way I could not lay flat anymore. Jean took a doe, clean, off the ridge north of camp, a good shot, quartering away, and she went maybe 40 yards and piled up in the cedars. And we heard the shot, and we all came, because that is what you do. You come to a shot. And we tracked the little blood and found her, and it was a good deer, and Jean was pleased, color up in his face, telling us about it. And we set to dressing her out right there. And it was while we were doing that, Danny and me with our hands in the deer, and Jean leaning on a cedar getting his breath, and Petey stood off a little watching the woods the way he does, that the drag started. We had her opened, and we rolled the guts out, and Danny said he would bring the truck around to the old skid road, so we would not have to drag her far. And he went, and it was Jean and Petey and me and the deer, and I was cleaning my hands on the moss when Petey said, "Quiet, something's on the trail." I looked. I did not see anything. The cedars in there are thick. You can see maybe 30, 40 feet before it all closes up into that gray-green tangle, and there was nothing to see. But then I heard it. The way you hear a thing you have been not hearing. A crunch. A pause. A crunch. Something walking the run we had walked in on, coming down toward us, slow and then stopping, and I thought, deer, finally, a deer. And I stood up, easy to get a look, because Gene had his tag filled, but Danny and I did not, and then it took another step, and I heard the weight of it, and no deer weighs that. It stopped again. It was close now, maybe just past where I could see in the thick, and I stood there with the gut steam still coming off my hands, and I listened to it breathe. That is the part I cannot get across right. It breathed, and I could hear it. A big wet bellows sound, in and out, slow, patient, and there was a wrongness to the pitch of it that made the back of my neck go tight, because it was low, chest low. But it was up high. The breathing was coming from up higher than a deer's chest, from up where a man's chest would be if the man were tall. And I stared into the cedars, trying to make a shape out of the gray, and I could not. And then Petey put his hand flat on my arm and pushed down, meaning get down, get low, and he stepped in front of Jean, and the breathing stopped. And the smell came. Roadkill and wet dog. Close, so close it was like a hand over my face, and Duke was not there to blame it on. Duke was back at the cabin refusing to come, and I stood in that smell, and I understood in my body before my mind would say it that there was a thing 40 feet from me in the cedars that I had no name for. Then the truck. Danny came grinding up the skid road with the diesel clatter and the tailgate banging, and whatever it was, it went. It did not run, not right away. It took one step back, I heard it. A single heavy displacement, and then it was gone. No crash, no crush of brush, just gone. The way the deer had been gone from the whole woods. An absence where a second ago there had been a weight and a breath and a stink. And Petey let go of my arm and straightened up, and his face was the color of ash. And Gene had his little brown bottle out and was tapping a tablet into his palm without seeming to know he did it. Nobody said anything to Danny. We loaded the deer and drove it back and hung it in the meat pole. And Danny talked the whole time about a rub line he had cut, big rub. A buck had savaged a wrist-thick popple down to the white. And I said, in the right places, and I watched the tree line. That night, Gene told the story. I had known it was coming. There is a rhythm to a camp, and when the men have had a couple of Petey's whiskeys, and the stove is roaring and the wind is up, the stories come, and the old ones come last. And Gene is the keeper of the old ones. He sat in Dad's chair. Nobody said anything about that either. He just sat in it. And I think he did it on purpose. I think he did it to be the older Keever, to sit where the head of the camp sits, and he had earned it. And he sat there with the whiskey in his hand and the empty finger of it we had poured for Dad still sitting, untouched, on the windowsill catching the firelight, and he told us about the winter of 1910. You know your great-grandfather worked the camps, he said. Before he had the farm, he was a sawyer for the Ambroy outfit, back when they were cutting the last of the big pine out of this country, and there was a camp, a winter camp, up in the Cedars, past where our camp sits now, up toward the Moreno headwaters, and this would have been the winter of 1910 or 1911. He told it a little different each time, and there was a winter that the men started losing dogs. The fire popped. Duke, who was inside now, who we had finally gotten inside, lifted his head off the floor and put it back down. Camp dogs, Gene said. Every camp had them, and they started coming up short. One, then two. Then the dogs would not go out at all. They would huddle under the bunkhouse and would not come out for meat. And the men said wolves. Because what else? Wolves were thick then. They had a bounty on them. And a wolf will take a dog. But then they lost a man. A teamster named Civilla, a Finn, went out to the horse hovel in the dark to see to a horse that was screaming, and he did not come back. And the horse was found in the morning with its throat opened and dragged half out of the hovel. A 1,400-pound horse dragged, and Civilla was found up in the Cedars. Gene stopped. He turned the whiskey in his hand. Up in the Cedars, he said again. In a tree. Wedged up in the crotch of a big cedar, 10, 12 feet up, the way a lynx will cache a hare, except no lynx is putting a grown man up a tree. And the snow all around under that tree was tracked, and the tracks, your great-grandfather said the tracks came in on 4 feet and they went out on 2. Nobody laughed. That is how I knew it had changed for all of us. Any other year somebody would have laughed, or Danny would have made the sound, the wolfman howl, and we would have broken it up. But that night, the 4 of us sat in the stove light and let it sit there, the way we let the empty chairs sit. They broke the camp, Gene said. In February, middle of a cutting season, with money on the ground, they broke a winter camp and walked out to Ambroy, 40 men, and the outfit lost a fortune. And none of them would say why, except that they were done, and the old Finns and the old Ojibwe men, the ones that stayed around here after, they had a word for it, and I never could say the word right. But the meaning of it your great-grandfather gave me, and the meaning was, the dog that stands up. That is all. The dog that stands up. He drank the last of his whiskey, and he told me, and I will tell you, that you do not go up into those cedars in the dark, and you do not answer it if it calls, because it will call, and it can put a word in the calling. It can put your own name in it if it has heard your name, and if you answer, you have told it where you are. The wind leaned on the cabin and the plank walls ticked, and Duke got up off the floor and came and pushed his big head into my lap and would not settle, and I put my hand on him and felt him trembling, this old dog, trembling like a pup. And I looked up and I met Petey's eyes across the fire, and Petey gave me a look I did not like, a look that said he was not hearing a story, he was hearing a report. The next thing was the deer, and I want to tell it careful, because it is the thing I still see. Third morning. I hunted the ridge again and again saw nothing, and coming back at mid-morning I cut down through the cedars a different way, following the little run that feeds the seep, and I came on a deer that had been killed in the night, a doe, and I stood over her a long time before I understood what I was looking at, because it did not read. An animal kill reads a certain way. I have seen wolf kills and coyote kills, and I have seen what a bear does to a gut pile, and there is a language to it, a mess to it, the way the belly gets opened and the good parts eaten and the hide worried back and the whole thing scattered and gnawed and pulled around by whatever came after, crows and fox and the rest. This was not that. This doe had been opened, yes, up the belly, one long clean pull, and the chest cavity was empty, the heart and lungs and liver taken, but the rest of her was untouched, no gnawing, no scatter, and she had been turned over onto her back, deliberately, her legs folded up, and her head had been set back over her own shoulder, turned around, and laid back along her spine so that she was looking behind herself, and there is no way an animal does that. There is no jaw and no paw that arranges a thing like that, that poses it, and the snow that had come down in the night, the first real snow, an inch of it, was tracked all around her, and the tracks came in on 4, and I found where they had risen up onto 2, the front prints stopping and the back prints going deep and long and upright away toward the deep cedars, and I did not follow them. I marked it in my head. And I went back and I did not eat lunch, and Danny asked what was wrong, and I told him, out on the woodpile where the others could not hear. I told him about the doe and the track that stood up, and I expected him to make the sound, to laugh, to be Danny, and he did not, because he had been carrying something too, and now he told me. He said the night before, out at the truck getting his good gloves, he had heard a howl, and it was not coyotes, and it was not wolves. He had grown up hearing both. And this was neither. It went too long and it climbed too high, and at the top of it, at the very top, he said, and here he stopped and looked at his boots. At the top of it there was almost a word. He could not say what word, but the shape of a word, like a man trying to howl, or like a howl trying to talk. We should go, I said. I said it right there on the woodpile. We should pack it up and go. And Danny looked at the cabin, at the smoke coming up off it straight in the cold, at the antlers on the meat pole, and Jean inside making coffee, and Petey up doing something to the roof again, and he said, Jean won't. This is Dad's. First year without Dad. You want to be the one that ran Wally Keever's camp off with a scary story? And that landed exactly where he aimed it, because he was right, because I had already thought it. Because there is a thing in a Keever man that would rather be eaten than be the one who could not do the thing his father did, and I hated Danny a little for knowing me that well, and I did not answer, and we did not go. And I have had a long time since to think about what a stupid, proud Keever kind of dying that almost was, and about how it did not almost. It did. It took one of us, and I will get there. Petey went to a far stand that afternoon, and he saw it. He had a stand nobody used much, a lock-on up a big white pine on the far side of the cedars, where a hardwood bench comes down to the swamp, a long walk, and Petey liked it, because it was far and quiet, and he is a man who wants far and quiet, and he went to it that afternoon over my saying maybe nobody should go far and alone, and he waved me off. Petey, who has forgotten more about these woods than I will ever know. And he went, and he came back after dark, after we had started to worry, after Jean had said we should get the truck. He came walking into the yard out of the 2-track with his rifle in both hands across his body like a man expecting to need it. and he came into the cabin and he sat down by the stove and he did not take his coat off and he did not say anything for a long time. And when Jean put a cup of coffee in his hands, he held it and did not drink it, and his hands were shaking, so the coffee jittered in the cup. We got it out of him, a piece at a time. He had been in the stand, last light, and the woods had gone quiet the way they went quiet, and he had smelled it before he saw it, the roadkill and the wet dog coming up the bench on the downdrift. And then across the little opening at maybe 80 yards at the edge where the hardwoods give to cedar, it had come out on 4 feet. And then Petey said it had stopped and it had stood up. And he stopped there and looked at the stove, and I thought he was not going to say the rest. And then he said it quiet in that flat report voice. It stood up like a man stands up, Petey said. Not like a bear. A bear stands up front first. Heavy, it rocks up. This come up all at once, easy, like you or me getting off a low chair. And it was tall. Standing there, it was tall as the crossbar on a swing set. 7 foot, more, and it had the shape of a man in the shoulders and the arms, long arms, and the head. He turned the coffee in his hands. The head was a dog's head. It turned it. It looked one way, and then it turned it, quick, like a dog hearing a sound. And I seen the shine come off its eyes when it turned. High up, way up, chest high on a man would be its belly, and the eyes were up above that, and it looked at my tree. He set the coffee down on the stove hearth. It knew I was there. It knew right where I was. And it stood there and let me know it knew. And then it went back down on 4 and it went into the cedars, and I did not climb down till full dark, and I do not mind telling you I have not been that scared since Korea. Petey did not talk right the rest of that night. That is the only way I know to say it. He is a talker. In his quiet way, he has 100 stories and a dry way of telling them, and that night he sat and stared at the stove and answered in 2 words when he answered at all, and once, late. When the fire had burned down and we were all pretending to sleep, I heard him say something in the dark, low, to himself, in French, or in the old Chippewa his grandmother spoke. I could not tell, over and over, and I understood that he was praying Petey LaRoche, who I had never once heard mention God, praying in the dark, in a language older than the camp. And I lay in my bunk with Dad's 30-06 leaned in the corner within reach, and I did not sleep at all. In the morning, we found the trail camera. Danny had put a trail cam on the skid road at the start of the week, a cheap one, to see what was moving. And he pulled the card that morning, and we ran it on his phone, crowded around the little screen. And it was the usual: a doe, another doe, a raccoon, a fox, with a full brush. All of it from the first 2 days. All of it before the deer went quiet. And then nothing. A long gap of nothing, which itself told the story. The woods emptying out, and then one picture, the last one, time-stamped the night Petey saw it, 3:17 in the morning, and it was black, all black. The flash had fired and caught nothing. No deer, no body, no shape, just the skid road and the wall of cedar beyond it. And at the top of the frame, at the very top, where the flash barely reached, up above where any 4-footed animal's eyes would be, up at 7 feet, 2 points of light, eye shine, 2 flat coins of green-white shine looking down into the camera from up in the dark, from up where a face would be if a man were standing there looking down at the little clicking thing on the tree. And around them nothing, just the dark holding them. And Danny turned the phone off without any of us asking him to, and put it in his pocket, and we did not look at it again. That was the day it took Danny. I have put off telling it, and I cannot put it off longer. It snowed again in the afternoon, harder, and the light went early, the way it does in November up here. The day just gives up around 4:30, and by 5 it is dusk, and by 5:30 it is dark. And Danny wanted the evening stand. I did not want him to go. I said so. But he had cut that rub line, and he had a good feeling, and he was tired of being scared. We were all tired of being scared. There is a limit to how long a man can hold the fear of that pitch, and Danny had hit his and gone past it into a kind of stubborn, and he said he was hunting the Popple whip stand a quarter-mile down the two-track, close in sight of the road near enough, and he would be in before full dark. And he took Dad's 30-30, and he clipped a little flashlight to his coat, and he went, and Duke tried to go with him, which was the first time all week Duke had tried to leave the yard, and Danny told him no and shut him in the cabin. And I have thought since that the dog knew that the dog was trying to go with him, because the dog knew, and we shut the dog in, and that is a thing I carry. Full dark came, and Danny did not. 5:30, then 6, then 6:15, and no flashlight coming up the two-track, no shape, and I stood on the step and cut my hands and called his name into the dark, and nothing came back. And I called again, and there was nothing. And then, far off, down toward where the two-track bends into the Cedars past the Popple whip, there was a howl. It went up long. It climbed the way Danny had said it climbed. Higher than a wolf, higher than anything, and it held at the top, and at the top of it, thin and stretched and wrong, there was a word, and the word was my name. Russ. Long and drawn and howled, but my name. And I stood on the step with my father's rifle in my hands and every hair on my body standing up and my whole life telling me to answer it, to call back, to run down that two-track, calling my brother's name, and Jean's story came up in me like cold water. You do not answer it. If you answer, you have told it where you are. And I clamped my jaw down on my own brother's name, and I did not answer. And I have wondered ever since if that was wisdom or if that was me saving my own skin. And I do not know, and I will never know, and that is the worst of it. We took the truck. Jean drove because it was Jean's Bronco, and there was no arguing him out of the wheel and no time to. And Petey rode shotgun with his rifle up, and I got in the back with Dad's .6 and Duke, because Duke would not be left. Duke came off the step and into the truck like a young dog, and stood in the back with his feet planted and his hackles up, and that dream sound going in him steady now. And Jean put it in gear, and we went down the two-track with the headlights carving a white tunnel through the falling snow, and the wipers going, and all four of us calling Danny's name out the windows into the dark. The Popple whip stand was empty. The little ladder up the Popple, empty, and Danny's flashlight was on the ground at the base of it, on, shining a cone into the snow. And I got out with the .6 and picked it up, and I did not see blood, and I did not see Danny. And I called, and Jean leaned on the horn, and the sound of it went out flat into the snow, and came back nothing. And Petey said, "Lo," from the truck, "there," and pointed the light, further down, past the stand, where the two-track drops and bends, and the cedars come in tight on both sides, so the road is a slot, a canyon of dark green, and there was a shape down in the slot. In the headlight throw, at the edge of where the light gave out, 100 yards, maybe, and Jean got back in, and we rolled toward it, slow, with the tires crunching, and I stood up in the back of the Bronco, with the topper open and my rifle over the cab and Duke pressed against my leg. And the shape resolved as we came, and I have tried 100 times to unsee it, and I cannot. It was standing in the two-track, in the middle of the road, in the headlights, and it was standing on two legs, and it was tall, taller than Petey had said. The top of it was up in the dark above the reach of the low lights, and the lights caught it from the waist down, and from the waist down it was wrong. The legs bent the wrong way at the joint, backward, like a dog's back legs, like a thing built to run standing up on the toes, and it was furred, dark, wet-looking in the snow, and it stood there in our lights, and it did not run. It turned its head. That is the image. That is the one. Everything else I can hold at arm's length, but not that, because it turned its head the exact way Duke turns his head when you make a sound he does not know, that quick cock, that tilt, curious, a dog's motion, a house dog's motion, the most familiar motion in the world, done by a thing 7 feet tall standing upright in the road in the snow. And its eyes came around and caught the light and threw it back, green-white, flat, up high, up where Petey said, up where no animal's eyes should be. And it looked at us in the truck, at me standing up in the back, and it opened its mouth, and I saw the length of it, the width of it, and it made a sound that was not the howl, a lower sound, a chest sound, almost the sound Duke made, that dream growl, but huge, coming out of a chest the size of a barrel, and it was not afraid. 3 things happened close together, and I have never been able to lay them in the right order. Duke went. He came off my leg and out over the tailgate before I could grab his collar, this 9-year-old gray-muzzled dog, and he went down the 2-track at the thing, and the headlights bang, going to it, going at it, the way a good dog goes at what is threatening his people, and I screamed his name. Jean made a sound. Behind me and to the side from the driver's seat, a small sound, a grunt, an "oh," and I heard the little brown bottle hit the floor mat and scatter its tablets, and Jean slumped over the wheel, and the horn came on and stayed on, one long flat blare, because his chest had finally given out, because his heart, the family heart, the thing that took my father, had chosen that exact minute in the dark with that thing in the lights to quit, and Petey was grabbing at him and hauling him back off the horn and yelling his name. And the thing moved. I have hunted my whole life, and I have seen deer jump, and I have seen a coyote turn on a dime, and I have never seen anything move the way that thing moved. It did not gather itself. It did not crouch to spring. It was standing still, and then it was not there, and then it was on Duke, 40 yards, covered in a blink, no run I could track, just a smear of dark across the headlight throw, and then it had my father's dog in the road, and I brought the .06 up, and I could not shoot because it was on Duke, because in the dark and the snow and the falling, I could not tell the dog from the thing, and I heard Duke's bang turn into something else and then stop, and I fired anyway, over them, into the dark, past them, to make noise, to make it go, and the muzzle flash whited everything out, and the .06 kicked into my bad shoulder like a mule, and when the flash cleared, the road was empty of it, just Duke in the snow, not moving. Just the empty slot of the 2-track and the snow coming down through the headlights and the horn finally cutting out because Petey had gotten Jean off it, and Jean not moving either, and Petey's voice cracking, saying my uncle's name over and over. Then Danny called out from the Cedars, off the left side of the road, weak, my name, but it was him, it was Danny's real voice. And I went over the tailgate and into the ditch, and up the other bank into the edge of the Cedars with the flashlight, and I found him 20 feet in, on the ground in the snow, and he was tore up. I am not going to tell all of it. I got a look at his back in the flashlight when I turned him, and I am not going to tell it. His coat was gone off one shoulder, and the shoulder was opened, and there were 4 long furrows down his back through the coat, and the flesh, 4 of them, spaced like fingers, like a hand had done it. A hand with claws, and he was gray and cold and going into shock. But he was alive. His eyes found me, and he said my name, and he said, "It carried me." He said, "It picked me up and carried me, and then it just put me down," and I did not understand that then, and I am not sure I want to understand it now, that it took him and carried him off, and then set him down, and left him alive. The way it had turned that doe's head back over her shoulder, arranged, placed, the way it had put a man up a cedar in 1910, some purpose in it, I cannot follow and do not want to. I got Danny up, bad shoulder and all. I got my brother across my back, and I got him down the bank, and Petey came and helped, and we got him into the back of the Bronco, and Jean was in the passenger seat where Petey had hauled him, and Jean was dead. I knew it. I had seen my father dead, and I knew the look, the slack of it, the way the face goes to nothing, but I did CPR on him anyway. In the bouncing back of that truck with Danny bleeding beside me and Petey driving now, Petey behind the wheel driving that Bronco up the 2-track like Jean drove it, too fast, throwing snow, and I did compressions on my uncle's chest and counted out loud and breathed into him, and it did nothing. It does nothing. When the family heart quits, it quits. And I knew it, and I did it anyway, all the way out to the county road, and I was still doing it when we hit pavement. Duke, we left. God forgive me, we left the dog in the road. There was Danny bleeding out, and Jean dead, and a thing in the dark that could cross 40 yards in a blink. And I made the call. I did not even make it. My body made it. And we left Dad's dog dead in the snow on the 2-track and drove out. And that is another thing I carry, along with not answering when it called Danny in my name, along with all of it. Petey drove to the Ambroy Highway store because it was the only phone, the landline in the store, and he pounded on the door until the man who lives above it came down in his long johns, and we used his phone. And I said the words into it, my brother is hurt bad and my uncle is dead. And the man from upstairs stood there in his long johns looking at Jean's body in the truck and at Danny's blood on the store floor and at the 4 of us covered in snow and blood, 3 of the living and 1 of the dead. And he did not ask what did it, and I was grateful, because I did not have an answer that would not have sounded like a man out of his mind. The rest is paperwork and grief. The ambulance came from Ambroy and took Danny, and they got him to Marquette, and he lived. He has the scars, 4 of them down his back, and the doctors there wrote it up as a bear, because that is the box on the form, and Danny let them, because what is he going to say? And he does not talk about it. And when the girls ask about the scars, he tells them a bear. And I have watched him tell them a bear and watched his face while he does it, and I know what it costs him. Jean they took to the funeral home in Ambroy, the same one that had my father in April, the same van even, I think, and the death certificate says cardiac arrest, which is true, which is not the truth. And we buried him next to my father in the plot in Moreno County that the Keevers have had since before the war, 2 brothers in a spring and a fall of the same year. And I stood at that second graveside 7 months after the first, with my brother beside me, leaning on a cane, and I did not cry either time. And I am telling you now that the not crying is the sickness. I know it is. But I could not, there was nothing in me that would come up. It had all gone somewhere I could not reach. We reported it. I want that on the record. 2 days after, when Danny was stable, I drove to the DNR field office in Ambroy, and I sat across a metal desk from a young officer with a good haircut, and I told him. Not all of it. I told him there was a large animal, a predator, that it had killed a deer and posed it wrong, that it had left tracks that walked on 2 legs, that it had attacked my brother and stood in the road in our headlights at 7 feet, and he wrote some of it down and stopped writing some of it down, and when I was finished he capped his pen and he said, kindly, that black bears come out of den early in a warm November, that a bear standing on its hind legs can go 7 feet, that a large bear's track in soft ground can smear and print bigger than it is, that in the stress of a family emergency people misremember. And he said it all kindly, and he did not believe a word I had said, and I did not blame him, because I would not have believed me either. And I got up and thanked him and drove home, and that was the report, and that is what the report says, bear, and that is what it will always say. Petey I do not see as much now. He came to Jean's funeral, and he stood in the back, and he left before the lunch, and when I have called him he is short with me. Not unkind, just short, like a man who has closed a door and does not want it opened, and I understand it, and I let him have it, the closed door, because I would like one too, and I cannot find where mine is. Danny healed up on the outside. The furrows closed and the skin grafted where they took skin off his thigh to patch the worst of the shoulder, and the physical therapist got the arm working again mostly, and by spring he could lift a case of beer over his head, which is the job. But he does not sleep with the light off anymore. His youngest told me that, not knowing it was a secret, the way kids hand you things. And once, at a cookout at my place in July, a neighbor's dog came around the corner of the garage fast and low, and Danny came up out of the lawn chair so hard he took the chair with him, and stood there white and shaking with a hamburger in his hand, and everybody laughed, and he laughed too, after, and I did not laugh, because I had seen his face in the half second before he made it a joke, and it was the face from the back of the Bronco. He is back on the beer route. He does not hunt. He gave me the 30-30 back, put it in my hands one day at his apartment without a word, and I understood. And I took it, and now I have both of Dad's rifles and neither of Dad's brothers, and I do not know what I am supposed to do with any of it. I did not sell the camp, I want to say that, so it is clear this is not that kind of ending. The camp is still ours, Danny's and mine, the plank cabin off the 2-track, the wood stove with the crack in the top plate, the antlers on the ridge beam, and the taxes get paid and the road grows in a little more each year, and I have not been back, and I do not say I never will. Because that is a coward's promise, and because up here we do not make promises about the woods. The woods do not care about our promises. Here is the last of it. This is a year on, near enough. This last November, the one just gone, I did not go to camp, and I told myself all the reasons, Danny's back, the drive, the mill, and none of them were the reason. And I got through the whole month telling myself I was fine. And then it was the first week of December, and I was driving home from a late shift, and I stopped for gas at the holiday station out on the highway past Ambroy, the last lit thing before the county goes dark. And I was standing at the pump in the cold with the numbers rolling on the display and the little TV in the pump talking at me about nothing. And behind the station there is a tree line, a tag alder edge, where the mowed lot gives to the state land, and the wind came around out of the northwest. And I smelled it. Roadkill and wet dog. Faint. On the cold air. There and gone, the way it comes. And I went, still with the nozzle in my hand, and I looked up at the tree line, at the black wall of it past the sodium lights, and up in it, up above the alders, up higher than a deer or a dog or a man, up at 7 feet, there were 2 flat coins of green-white shine, low and steady, looking back at me across the lot, not moving, and the wind moved the alders, but the shine did not move, and out of the dark, far off and thin and climbing, a howl went up, and at the top of it, stretched and wrong, there was almost a word, and I stood at the pump with the gas still running over into the snow, and I did not answer it. And I thought about my father in his chair with the crackers on the arm, and my uncle slumped over the wheel with the horn blaring, and my father's dog in the snow on the 2-track. And I stood there, and I did not answer, and the numbers on the pump rolled and rolled, and the shine held up in the dark, at the wrong height, waiting to see if this time I would. Story 4. The Last Cabin on Kettle Lake. The Kellers left on a Tuesday, and I remember it was a Tuesday because Mrs. Keller made a point of it, standing on the dock in her town coat, with her purse hugged against her like somebody might take it. And she said, "We always try to be gone by the first Tuesday in November, Cal. Gives us a cushion before the weather turns mean." She said it the way people say things they have said many times to many caretakers, and I nodded like it meant something to me. And behind her, the float plane sat rocking a little against the pilings with its engine ticking. Mr. Keller was quieter. He was a big, soft man who had made his money in something to do with insurance downstate, and he handed me a folder with the whole island laid out in it. Every valve and breaker and shutoff labeled in a spidery hand that wasn't his, and he said, "The last fellow started this. You keep it up." I told him I would. He looked at me a second longer than he needed to, and I thought he was going to say something else, and then he didn't. He got in the plane. The pilot, a lean kid from International Falls named Denny, who chewed gum the whole time, pulled the door shut and gave me a thumbs up through the glass, and then the engine came up to a roar that flattened the water, and they went skating out across the bay and lifted off over the trees and were gone, and the sound of them hung around a while, and then it was just the lake. I want to tell you it felt good, that first quiet. It did. That was the whole reason I took the job. 3 months of nobody, of no phone that mattered ringing, no subcontractor telling me the price of copper had gone up again, no bank on the other end of a call being sorry to inform me. Just me and a woodpile and a lake as big as a small sea, the Minnesota side behind me and the Ontario shore somewhere out past the far islands where you couldn't hardly see it on a gray day. Kettle Lake. It's not on most maps by that name. The Keller's Island sat about 6 miles out from the landing at the end of a gravel road that itself was 30 miles from anything you'd call a town. To get to me, you had to want to get to me. I stood on the dock a long time after the plane was gone. The cold was already in the wood. It came up through my boots. I had a bad back from 20 years of framing houses, and the cold found it the way it always did. A dull ache low down that I'd stopped mentioning to anybody because there was nothing to be done about it, and complaining wore people out. I had a thermos of coffee in the lodge going stale, and I went and got it and drank it standing there, black the way I always took it, and it was the first of a lot of cups. I go through coffee like other men go through cigarettes. My mother used to say it would stop my heart one day, and I used to tell her something had to. The island was maybe 40 acres of granite and jack pine and birch, with the main lodge set up on a shelf of rock looking south down the length of the lake. Below it, the boathouse, gray-boarded and leaning a little, with the Keller's good boat inside on a cradle, and my boat, the caretaker's boat, a heavy old aluminum thing with a 94 outboard on it, 40 horse, tied off at the dock for as long as the water would let me run it. Then, scattered back in the trees along a path of railroad ties sunk into the moss, the guest cabins, 6 of them, cabin 1 down to cabin 6. Though there was no cabin 5 anymore, it had burned before the Keller's time, and they'd never rebuilt. So it went 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 6 off by itself at the north point, where the wind came across worst. The generator shed, the pump house over the lake intake, a wood stove in the lodge, and a smaller one in each cabin, and cords of split birch and pine under tarps that it was my job to keep dry and keep stacked. The work for the first week was closing. You don't just walk away from a place like that when the season ends. You drain every line so it doesn't burst in January. You pull the batteries. You put the boats up. You take the bedding and hang it so the mice don't nest in it, though the mice always win. You go through cabin by cabin, and you shut the water, and you blow the lines, and you set the mouse traps, and you take a last look, and you lock the door, and you write it in the logbook, and then you go to the next one. It's slow work, and it's good work. The kind that fills your hands and empties your head, and I liked it. Cabin 1 I did the first afternoon, cabin 2 and 3 the next day. Cabin 6, out at the point, took me the better part of a morning because the wind had gotten under the storm door and sprung a hinge, and I had to reset it, and my back sang the whole time, but I got it. I saved cabin 4 for last. No reason. It sat closest to the lodge, just down the slope, with a good view of the dock and the black water, and I figured I'd keep it open a few days more in case I wanted a change of walls. And I told myself that was why, though later I wondered. I settled into the work of it, and the work was good. I'd get up before light, feed the wood stove, put the coffee on, and stand at the kitchen window while the sky came up gray behind the pines and drink the first cup looking at nothing. Then out. There is a lot to do on a place like that even after the closing's done, or maybe especially then, because a lodge is a living thing and it wants to die the minute nobody's tending it, and my whole job was to keep it from dying over the winter. I cut wood. I split and stacked and covered wood every day because you can never have enough of it, and the cold was coming. I walked the shoreline checking the cribbing under the docks. I ran the generator an hour morning and night to keep the batteries up and the little chest freezer cold. And I checked the fuel and I checked the oil, and I wrote it all down in the logbook in my own hand under Emmett Boyd's. And I liked the look of my writing under his, 2 men keeping the same place, though I didn't know yet what his writing did at the end. I'd walk the cabins too, even the closed ones, just to check them. That was habit from the contracting years. You walk a site, you put your hands on things, you catch the small problem before it's a big one. I'd let myself into each dark drained cabin and stand a minute and smell the pine and the cold and the dust, and make sure no window had blown, no critter had gotten in, no branch had come down on a roof in the night. Cabin 1, 2, 3, cabin 6 out at the point, and cabin 4 I kept for me, open, a chair and a lamp and the book I was reading, a fat paperback western, and I'd go down there some evenings just to sit in a different set of walls and pretend I was a guest, pretend somebody had rowed me out to this island for a week of fishing and I got to leave when it was done. The thing about that much quiet is it lets everything in. That's what nobody tells you. You take a job like that to get away from the noise, from the bank and the bills and the voice in your own head that lists your failures back to you at 3 in the morning. And for a while the quiet does the trick. The quiet's clean, it rinses you out. And then the quiet gets so big it turns around and starts filling itself, and the thing it fills itself with is whatever you brought out there in you. I brought Tommy. I didn't know that when I signed the papers. I thought I brought a bad back and a coffee habit and a woman I was too much of a coward to love right. But I'd brought Tommy. I'd been carrying him the whole time under everything, and the island was quiet enough finally for him to start coming up. There was a woman back home named Rhonda. I want to be honest about what that was, because it matters to how I was, alone out there. Rhonda and I had been trading voicemails and the occasional real call for the better part of a year, ever since the business went under and I'd moved into the little apartment over the hardware in town. We'd met at a wedding. She cut hair. She had a laugh that started low and climbed, and she was kind to me in a way I hadn't earned and didn't know what to do with, and I kept her at exactly the distance where I couldn't lose her and she couldn't reach me. Before the Kellers left, I'd told her the deal. There was a marine radio in the lodge, and there was a satellite phone that worked when it felt like it, and cell service was a joke you told yourself. And so we'd agreed I would call her Sunday nights on the sat phone, 7 o'clock, and if the phone was down, I'd raise the landing on the radio and have them pass a message. That was the plan. Sunday nights, 7 o'clock, a woman's voice from a warm kitchen 100 miles south. I told myself I looked forward to it, and mostly I did. Here is the thing I didn't tell Rhonda, and didn't tell the Kellers, and hadn't told anybody in a long time. I had a brother, Tommy. He was 4 years younger than me, and he followed me everywhere. And in the winter of 1992, when I was 14 and he was 10, he went through the ice on a pond behind our uncle's place while I was supposed to be watching him. I was throwing a tennis ball for the dog. I heard the ice go. It doesn't crack like in the movies. It sort of whumps. A sound you feel in your chest more than hear. And by the time I turned around, there was just the hole and his mitten on the edge of it, and the water already going still. They got him out an hour later, 3 towns worth of men, with ropes and a ladder, and it was too late. It had been too late from the first whump. And my mother never once said it was my fault, and never once had to. I stopped going near ice. I stopped going near a lot of things. And then somehow at 40, I took a job on an island in the middle of a lake that was going to freeze. And if you'd asked me why, I'd have told you the money. And the money was real, but it wasn't the reason. I don't know what the reason was. I think some part of me was walking back toward the pond. I'll tell you one thing about Tommy, because it matters later, and then I'll leave him be a while. He had a thing he said when we were kids and I'd get scared of something, a dog, the dark, the deep end at the town pool. He'd take my hand, my little brother, 4 years younger, taking my hand, and he'd say, "I got you, Cal, I got you." He got it from our dad, who said it to us, and Tommy said it to me, and it was a family thing, our thing, 3 words, and nobody else on this earth knew Tommy ever said it, because it was between us. After he died, I couldn't hear those words. If a man on a job site said, "I got you," reaching for the other end of a beam, I'd have to walk off and stand behind the truck a minute. Rhonda said it once, joking, reaching to catch a glass I'd knocked. "I got you," and she saw my face change, and she never knew why, and I never told her. I'm telling you now, because you'll need to know it when the time comes. When the thing out on the water finally found those 3 words and said them to me in my brother's voice, and God forgive me, that was the closest I ever came to opening the door. That's the man I was, standing on the dock that first week. Bad back, too much coffee. A woman I held at arm's length. A brother I never talked about in the ground since before I could grow a beard. And a lake going quiet all around me, the way a room goes quiet when somebody's decided to tell you something and is just waiting for you to be still enough to hear it. The cold came on hard the second week. The mornings were down in the 20s, and the puddles in the low rocks skinned over with ice by dark and didn't thaw till noon, and out past the dock the bay started to change. You could see it happen if you watched, which I did, because there wasn't much else. The open water was black and moving. But along the shore, in the still pockets where the wind couldn't reach, a gray film crept out from the rocks each night. Skim ice. Cat ice, my uncle used to call it. Thin enough a cat might trust it and go through. It wasn't ice you could walk on. It was a long way from that. But it wasn't water you could run a boat through either, not without chewing your prop to pieces, and every morning it reached out a little further from the shore, and every morning the black part in the middle got a little smaller. I ran the boat while I still could. I'd take it out around the island most afternoons, partly to keep the engine from fouling and partly just to be moving. I'd nose it through the skim near the boathouse, cracking it, and get out to the open black in the middle of the bay, where the water was still free, and idle there and drink my coffee, and look back at the island. It was pretty from out there, the lodge up on its rock with the smoke going straight up from the chimney in the still cold air. I remember thinking I could stay out here forever. I remember thinking a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. Rhonda and I had our Sunday call, and the phone held for once. She said the town was the same. She said the diner had a new girl. She said, "You sound far away." I said, "I am far away." And she laughed, her climbing laugh, and told me not to get eaten by a bear, and I said the bears were denned up by now. And she said, "Buy something then." And we hung up, and I sat in the dark lodge with the wood stove ticking and felt about as good as I'd felt in a year. I want you to hold on to that. There was a stretch out there, a couple of weeks, where it was the best I'd been. I need somebody to know that before I tell the rest. She'd asked me once, early on, why a man would take a job like that. It was one of the first real conversations we had, back before I left, at her kitchen table with the good light coming in. And I gave her the answer I gave everybody, money in the quiet, and she looked at me over her coffee and said, "That's what you say. That's not why." She wasn't unkind about it. She just saw me a little clearer than I wanted to be seen, which was the whole trouble with Rhonda, which was why I kept her at the end of a phone line 100 miles off. I changed the subject that day. But she was right, and I think she knew she was right, and I think part of why she let me go without a fight was she figured a man had to go do whatever it was he needed to go do out there in the cold, and either he'd come back lighter or he wouldn't come back the same. I came back not the same. I don't know if I came back lighter. Some nights I think I left something out there, and some nights I think I brought something back, and those are two ways of saying I'm not the man who left. The cold kept coming. Each morning was harder than the last. The birches had dropped the last of their leaves and stood bare and white against the black spruce, and the ground went from soft to firm to iron, and my breath hung in the lodge some mornings before the stove caught. I started wearing every layer I owned. My back liked the cold less every day. I'd stand under the hot water of the little propane shower in the lodge as long as the tank would give me, letting it beat on the low part of my spine, and even that only bought me an hour of ease. I mention the back because it's true, and because it's the kind of ordinary misery that keeps a man tethered to the real world. And when the other thing started, I held onto my aching back the way a man overboard holds onto a plank, because it was real. It was just a body doing what bodies do, and everything else out there was starting not to be. The first thing was the footprints. It was a morning near the middle of the third week. I'd slept poorly, my back, and I got up before it was fully light to feed the wood stove, and while the coffee went, I stepped out onto the lodge porch to look at the day. The lake was flat and gray and steaming, that way cold water steams when the air is colder than it is, little ghosts of vapor walking on the surface. And down at the dock, in the frost that had set on the boards overnight, there were footprints, wet ones, dark on the silvered wood. They came up out of the water at the end of the dock, right where the ladder was, the swimming ladder we hadn't pulled yet, and they walked up the dock toward shore, and then up the ramp, and then along the path of railroad ties, and in at the door of the boathouse, bare feet. I could see the toes, and here is the thing that stopped me on the porch with the coffee going cold in my hand. They only went one way, up out of the water and into the boathouse. There were no prints coming back. I stood there a while telling myself things. An animal. Otter, maybe, though otters don't have feet like that, and don't walk upright up a dock. A trick of the frost. Water dripping off the ladder and running in a line. A dream I was still half in. I'd slept bad, I was foggy, the light was low. I made myself walk down there. My back complained on the ramp. And up close the prints were worse, not better, because up close they were clearly feet, a grown man's feet, longer and narrower than mine, and they were wet, actually wet, beaded. When everything around them was frost, dry frost that crunched under my boots. I followed them to the boathouse door. It was shut. I'd shut it myself the night before. I was near certain, though when you live alone, you stop being certain of small things because there's nobody to check you. I opened it. The boathouse was dim, and it smelled of gas and old rope and lake, the way it always did. The Keller's good boat sat on its cradle under a tarp. My boat wasn't in there, it was at the dock. There was nobody. There was nowhere for anybody to be. The prince came in the door and stopped, just stopped astride inside in the middle of the dirt floor, as if whoever it was had taken one step in and then lifted off the ground. I stood in the doorway a long time. Then I went and got a broom. And I don't know why I did this, but I swept the footprints off the dock. All of them. Sweeping the wet dark marks off the frosted boards and into the water. And I felt better when they were gone. And I felt like a crazy man for feeling better. And I made a fresh pot of coffee and drank it too fast, and my hands didn't shake, but they wanted to. I wrote it in the logbook. Not all of it. I wrote frost on dock, otter sign, maybe. I looked at that a while, and then I turned back through the logbook to see what the last fellow had written all season, because I had only skimmed it before, and it was ordinary. Weather, woodcut, guests in and out, repairs, a steady, dull, competent hand. His name, from the front page, was Emmett Boyd. I didn't know him. The Kellers had said he'd finished the season the year before and gone off to caretake someplace warmer. Kentucky, I thought. They said, a lake down there. And I'd thought, smart man. His last entries the previous fall were the same as all the rest right up until they weren't, but I didn't know that yet. I hadn't read to the end. I closed the book. That night I heard the knock. I was in bed, in the little caretaker's room off the back of the lodge, and it was late, and the wood stove had burned down, so the room was cold, and I had the covers to my chin. And through the floor, through the rock the lodge sat on, through everything, I heard a knock. Slow. Deliberate. 3 of them, spaced out, coming up from below and off toward the water. Knock, knock, knock. Not the house settling, not ice. It had a knuckle in it. It sounded, and I lay there in the dark knowing exactly how it sounded and hating that I knew. It sounded like somebody knocking on the underside of the dock from below. From in the water, reaching up and rapping on the boards. Like a man trapped under ice, my mind said, before I could stop it. And I made myself stop it. And I lay there until the light came and I didn't hear it again. And I didn't sleep. I want to be fair to myself. A man alone in the cold, sleeping bad, carrying what I carried, he hears things. He sees things in the frost. I knew that. I'd have told any of it to a doctor, and had him nod and write me something. So I did what you do. I found reasons. The prints were an animal or a dream. The knock was ice shifting under the dock as the bay froze. Expansion, contraction, the natural voice of a lake going hard for the winter, and it just happened to sound like a fist. Because that was where my head already was. I told myself these things, and I half believed them, and I kept working, because the work was the only thing that held, and there was plenty of it, and my hands needed it. Balloons should have told me sooner. I know birds. I grew up on water, before the water took Tommy, and I stopped loving it. Loons leave. They're gone from the North Country by the end of October, first hard freeze at the latest. Off to the ocean for the winter, and by the time the Kellers flew south, the lake had already gone silent of them. That particular silence a northern lake has in November, when the loons have quit it. I hadn't heard one in weeks. And then one night, deep in, with the bay skimming over more each dark, I heard loons calling out on the water. That long wail they do, the one people call lonesome, and then the tremolo, the crazy laughing run of it, back and forth across the bay in the dark. 2 of them, it sounded like, maybe 3, calling and answering, in water that was 3/4 iced, in cold that no loon would sit out in, on a night when every loon in the hemisphere was 1,000 miles south riding the salt swells. I stood on the porch in my long johns and boots with a coat thrown over, and I listened to the loons that couldn't be loons. And the sound was right, exactly right. That's what I couldn't get past. It was a perfect loon, the wail climbing and breaking just the way it should. And then it changed. Not much. Just at the end of one of the wails, the pitch bent, the way a voice bends, the way a thing bends a sound it's copying when it doesn't quite have the trick of it. And for 1 second, it wasn't a loon at all. It was something trying to be a loon and getting it almost all the way right, and then it was a loon again. I went inside. I put the bar across the lodge door, a thing I'd never done. A heavy oak bar in iron brackets that I'd figured was left over from bear years. And I sat by the stove and fed it wood until the room was too hot and I was sweating, and I still felt cold, cold in the deep part of me. And I drank coffee I didn't need, and outside the loons that weren't loons called across the freezing bay until almost dawn. After that, the small things came faster, the way they do, or the way I noticed them faster, I can't say which. The smell was next. I went into cabin 4, the one I'd kept open 4 days after the loons, to get a book I'd left in there, and the smell hit me in the doorway, lake bottom. There's no other way to say it. That green-black rot smell of the muck under a lake, the stuff that comes up on your anchor, decayed weed and fish and mud, the smell of the deep cold places light doesn't get to. In a closed dry cabin, with the water drained, and the wood stove cold, and the windows sealed. I'd shut that cabin up myself. Well, half shut it. I'd drained the line but left it open for me, and it had been fine. It had smelled of pine and dust and cold like all of them. Now it smelled like the bottom of the lake, so strong I gagged, and I went around looking for a dead animal, a mouse on the wall, thinking that was it. A mouse had died and rotted, but a mouse doesn't smell like that. A mouse smells like a mouse. And there was nothing, no carcass, no wet. The floor was dry, and under the smell of lake bottom, there was another thing I only got for a second, faint, that I knew and couldn't place, and then could and wished I couldn't. It smelled a little like a boy, like the top of a kid's head in summer. Sweat and pond and sun, like Tommy used to smell coming in from outside. I got my book, and I got out, and I locked cabin 4, and I did not go back in it for a long time. Then the water started coming inside. Little things at first, the way it always started with little things. A dampness in the corner of the lodge kitchen, a dark stain spreading up the pine boards from the floor, and I checked the pipes, and they were dry. I drained them, and I checked the roof, and it was sound. And the stain was just there, wet to the touch, cold, and it dried by afternoon and came back that night. Then a drip. I heard it before I found it, that plink, plink, plink in the dark, and I got up and followed it with a flashlight, and it was coming from the middle of the lodge ceiling. A single drop forming and falling and forming and falling in the middle of a room, with nothing above it but attic and roof and cold, clear sky, no pipe, no tank, nothing. Water dropping out of solid wood. It made a little dark pool on the floorboards. I put a pot under it, and the drip stopped, and I lay awake for the sound of it, and didn't come. And in the morning the pot was dry, bone dry, like it had never dripped at all. But the stain in the wood of the ceiling was there, a watermark, spreading, and it stayed. There was the night with the intake, too, that I've mostly tried not to think about. The lodge water came from a lake intake, a pipe that ran out into the deep cold water past the dock and pulled the lake up into a catchment tank in the pump house, and it fed the taps in the lodge and the shower. One night the taps started running. All of them. I woke to the sound of water, every faucet in the lodge, kitchen and bathroom open and gushing, the shower going, and I ran through the dark, turning them off, and they were cold, cold as the lake. And when I got the last one shut, I stood in the sudden quiet dripping, and I could hear the pump out in the shed, still running, pulling the lake up into the house. And I went out in my boots and my long johns with a flashlight, and I shut the pump off with the switch. And I stood in the pump house with the flashlight on the black surface of the catchment tank. And the water in the tank was moving, not sloshing from the pump. The pump was off. It was turning slow, a slow deep circle, the way water turns over a drain, except that tank had no drain. And I put the light on it and watched it turn, and I thought I saw, down in it, under the turning surface, something pale go by, and I did not put my hand near that tank, and I drained it in the morning, and drank bottled water and melted snow the rest of my time out there, and never used the intake again. I stopped sleeping much. I'd get an hour or two. I ran the boat harder in the daytime, needing the noise and the motion, needing to be off the island, and the black open water in the middle of the bay was smaller every time, the skim ice reaching, gray and patient. And one afternoon I ran out to the open part, and it was so small I could barely turn the boat around in it. And I understood that in a few days, a week at most, there would be no open water at all, and then there would be no boat, and the ice wouldn't be thick enough to walk on for weeks after that. There is a window out there at Freeze Up where you cannot leave. The boat won't run, and the ice won't hold. Emmett Boyd had known it. The Kellers had known it. That's why they left by the first Tuesday in November. That's what the cushion was for. I had let the window get in front of me. Some part of me had wanted to. I knew that too, and it scared me worse than the drips. That was when I finally read to the end of the logbook. I'd been avoiding it. I know that now. I'd read the whole season. Emmett Boyd's dull, competent hand, all the wood and weather, and I'd stopped a few pages from the end because I hadn't wanted whatever was on those pages, the way you don't want to read the last letters of somebody you're afraid died badly. But that night, with the drip in the ceiling and the smell of lake bottom leaking out from under cabin 4's door all the way up to the lodge on the wind, I sat by the stove with the book, and I read the rest. It went strange, the same way I was going strange. That was the worst of it, reading it. Around the third week of his November, the year before, Emmett's steady hand started to shake. Just a little, the letters looser. Frost on dock, he wrote. Otter sign. I sat back when I read that, my own words. Then, heard loons, can't be loons. Then a few days of just weather, forced looking. The words of a man holding on. Then, water in cabin 4. Smells like the lake. Then, and I read this 3 times, someone knocking under the dock at night. I know it is nothing. It is the ice. Then a gap of 2 days. Then, in a hand I could barely read, the letters gone all to pieces. It sounds like Danny. It says the thing Danny said. God help me, it is Danny's voice. I don't know who Danny was. A brother, a son, a friend. The book didn't say, and I'll never know. But I knew what it meant, sitting there. I knew it in my spine. Emmett Boyd had lost somebody to water too. That's who takes these jobs. That's who ends up alone on an island at Freeze Up, people with a hole in them shaped like somebody who drowned. The last entry was 2 words and a date. The date was the first week of December. The 2 words were going out. That's all. Going out. And then the logbook stopped, and there were 40 blank pages after it. And Emmett Boyd had, according to the Kellers, finished his season and gone to caretake a lake in Kentucky. And I sat there with the book and thought, no, he didn't. No, he did not. The Kellers were told he did. Somebody told them that. But this man wrote, going out on a December night at Freeze Up, and the book stops there, and I am sitting in his chair. I got on the radio the next morning. I tell you, I was calm about it, but I wasn't. I raised the landing, the outfitter's place at the end of the gravel road that monitored Channel 16, and a man answered, sleepy, and I asked him, careful, keeping my voice level, whether he knew Emmett Boyd, the fellow who'd caretaken the Keller Island the season before, and whether it was true he'd gone south. There was a long pause on the radio, the hiss of it. Then the man said, Boyd. Yeah, they never found him. I said, what? And he said, you didn't know that? Went off the island somehow at freeze up. Boat was still there. They figured he went through the ice, trying to walk off. Or fell off the dock. Drunk, maybe. I don't know. DNR looked. Never found the body. Cold water like that, deep, sometimes they don't come up. I stood there holding the mic. He said, you all right out there? And I keyed it and said, fine, just curious. Somebody left a logbook, and he said, well, you be careful. Water's making now. Don't do anything stupid trying to leave. You leave when the plane comes or you don't leave here. And I said I heard. And I put the mic down, and I looked out the window at the bay, and the last black patch of open water in the middle of it was gone, overnight, skimmed over, gray, corner to corner. The window had shut. I was on the island till the ice went hard or somebody flew in for me, and both of those were weeks away. There was the radio, too, the day before the phone died, that I keep circling back to. I had the marine radio on Channel 16 the way I always did in the daytime, low, the static of it, a kind of company, and I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when the static changed. It thinned out. It got a shape to it, the way white noise does when you're tired and your ear wants to make it into something, except this wasn't my ear, or I don't think it was. Because I sat up straight and put my cup down, and I was as awake as I've told you I get. Under the hiss there was a voice, small, far off, coming up through the static the way a station comes up when you're driving and you crest a hill. It was saying, my name, and then something else, over and over, patient. And I leaned down, close to the speaker, with my heart going, and I made out the words, and the words were, Cal, come get me. I'm still in the water, Cal. Nobody ever came and got me. And it was Tommy, and it was on the radio, on Channel 16, the emergency channel, the one channel that was supposed to be my line to living people. And I grabbed the mic and keyed it and said, Marie? Marie, you there? And my own key cut the voice off. And when I let go of the mic, there was only static, ordinary static, the flat hiss of a dead channel. And then Marie came on a second later, clear and close and human. Go ahead, hon. I read you. Like nothing had happened, like she'd heard nothing. And I sat there shaking and told her, never mind, just checking the radio. And I turned it down almost to nothing after that, and only turned it up when I called her, because I could not stand the thought of that voice living down inside the static all day where I couldn't hear it, waiting, coming up through the hiss, whenever it got quiet enough. The sat phone died that afternoon. Not dramatic. I went to call Rhonda a day early, needing to hear her, and it wouldn't find a signal. Just searched and searched. That little icon going around, and then it said no service and shut itself off and wouldn't come back on. I put it on the charger. The charger ran off the generator. The generator was fine. I'd fueled it that morning, and when I went to check, it was off. Not out of fuel. Off. The switch thrown. I hadn't thrown it. I threw it back, and it started, and the lodge lights came up, and I stood in the pump house looking at that switch, and I couldn't make it be nothing. I couldn't do it anymore. The pile of nothings had gotten too big. I went back in and tried the radio, and it worked. It still worked. Channel 16 came up with its little static, and I held on to that. As long as the radio worked, I could reach the landing. As long as I could reach the landing, I wasn't alone the way Emmett Boyd had been alone. It came for me 3 nights later. I had barred the door every night since the loons. I had taken to sleeping when I slept, on the couch in the main room by the wood stove, with all the lights I could run on, with the radio on the table beside me tuned to 16, and my boots on, which I told myself was because of the cold, and was really so I could run if I had to. That night the wind had died. Dead calm. The kind of calm that comes with the hardest cold, when the lake is making ice fast and the whole world holds still to let it. The stove ticked. I was on the couch, not sleeping, staring at the ceiling stain, when the knock came again. From below, from the dock. Knock, knock, knock. And this time, it didn't stay at the dock. I heard it come up. I heard the wet feet on the ramp, on the railroad ties, that flat slapping tread of a barefoot man walking on frozen ground, coming up the path from the water toward the lodge, unhurried. And with it came the drip. A steady dripping as it walked, as if it carried the lake up, out of the lake with it, and the lake ran off it the whole way. And I lay on the couch and could not move, the way you can't in the worst dreams. Except I was awake. I was all the way awake. I have never been more awake. The steps came up to the porch. The boards took the weight. Wet feet, right outside the door, an arm's length from my face, through 2 inches of oak. The dripping. And then it spoke. Cal. It was Tommy's voice. I want to be careful here, because this is the part nobody believes, and I don't blame them. It wasn't like Tommy's voice. It wasn't close to Tommy's voice. It was Tommy's voice, the exact voice. 10 years old, a little high, a little hoarse the way he always was in the cold. My brother's voice on the other side of the door 26 years after I watched the water go still over him. Cal, I'm cold. Let me in. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I bit down on my own hand to keep from answering, because I wanted to answer. That was the horror of it, that even then, even knowing, some part of me, a grown man and still 14, wanted to fling the bar off the door and pull my little brother in, out of the cold, and wrap him in every blanket in that lodge, and never let go. And if I had, I know now. That's what Emmett Boyd's book meant. That's what going out meant. If I had opened that door, there would have been 40 blank pages after me, too. Cal, why'd you stop watching me? I put both hands over my mouth. The tears came. I made no sound. It stood out there dripping, and it said, in Tommy's voice, soft, not angry, worse than angry, you were supposed to watch me. I called you. Didn't you hear me call? And I hadn't. That was the thing. That was the exact thing. The thing I'd never told a living soul. That under the ice, before they got him out, they said he'd have been able to see the light through it for a minute, been able to maybe hear, and I'd always tortured myself that he'd called for me, and I'd been throwing a ball for the dog and hadn't heard. Nobody knew that. Nobody alive knew I thought that, and it was on the porch saying it in his voice. Then it went to the windows. It left the door and I heard it move around the lodge, the wet feet, the drip, from window to window. And at each one there'd be a pause, and I lay there and would not look. I stared at the ceiling and would not turn my head, until I got to the big window over the couch, right above me, and it stopped there, and I heard it press against the glass. A wet sound, a lot of wet, like a whole body of water leaning on the pane, and Tommy's voice came through the glass right over my head and said, "Come down to the dock, Cal. The ice is good now. It's real good ice." I walked all the way out on it. "Come out on the ice with me. I'll show you where I go." I turned my head. God help me, I don't know why I turned my head, the same reason Emmett Boyd wrote, "Going out, I guess." And there was a handprint on the outside of the glass. High up. Head height, if it was standing. A man's height, way higher than a 10-year-old could reach. A big long-fingered hand, pressed flat and wet against the window in the dark. Water running down off it in the lodge light, and behind the hand, out past it, in the black, a shape. I won't say I saw it clear. I didn't. That's the truth, and it's also the mercy. It was the shape of a man made out of the wrong thing, too tall and too thin, and standing too still, and the water ran off it, and here is the one thing I did see clear, the one thing I can't put down. The water ran off it wrong. It ran up. Off its shoulders and off its lifted arm, the water beaded and ran upward, toward the sky, drops crawling up it into the dark like rain going home. And that more than the voice, more than the handprint, that is the thing that told me the deepest part of my brain, the true thing, that this was not Tommy, had never been Tommy, that Tommy was 26 years in the cold ground under a stone with a lamb on it, and that this was something the lake had made to look like my grief, and it had gotten everything right except which way the water falls. I rolled off the couch onto the floor, and I put my back against the base of the wood stove where it was hot, too hot, and I stayed there. It stayed at the window a long time. It went back to the door. It knocked. Soft, Tommy's small knock. It said my name 100 ways. It begged, and then it didn't beg, and the not begging was worse, when it dropped Tommy's voice for just a second, between words, and there was a sound underneath, a deep, cold, moving sound like current under ice, before it climbed back into being my brother. It said, near dawn, so quiet I barely got it. You'll come out. Everybody comes out. Emmett came out. And then the porch boards let go of the weight, and I heard the wet feet go back down the path, down the ramp, out onto the dock. And I heard them go out along the boards, and then I heard them keep going, out past the end of the dock, out onto the ice, that flat slapping tread getting fainter, walking out across the new ice into the middle of the frozen bay, and then nothing. Dawn came gray and total. I lay on the floor by the stove and watched the window go from black to gray to a hard white light, and I did not move until the sun was actually up over the trees. And then I got up like an old man, and I looked at the window, and the handprint was still there, frozen now, a plate of clear ice in the shape of a hand fused to the outside of the glass. And I have never wanted anything the way I wanted to not be alone on that island. I got on the radio at first light, and I did not keep my voice level. Marie took it, and I heard her go quiet, and then she said, they couldn't get a boat to me, the lake was making, and they couldn't get a plane on floats to me. The bay was iced, and they couldn't get a plane on skis to me. The ice wasn't thick enough to land on, and I was in the window, the same window that took Boyd, and she was sorry. And the best they could do was call the DNR and see if the big lake was open enough on the far side to work something, and to hold on, and to for God's sake not go out on the ice no matter what I saw or heard. And I said, you believe me. And there was a pause, and she said, I've worked this radio 11 years, hon. You're not the first caretaker to call me sounding like that. You hold on. And that, of everything, undid me. That I wasn't the first. That there was a list of us, men with holes in them shaped like the drowned, sitting on islands that freeze up talking to a woman on Channel 16 in a voice like mine. I held on. I don't know how to make the next 4 days sound like anything but 4 days, because that's what they were. 4 days of not sleeping, of the stove and the coffee and the radio, of the handprint of ice on the window that I couldn't bring myself to chip off. It came back each night. I won't walk you through all of them. It's the same, and it's worse each time. That's all. The knock and the wet feet and Tommy's voice at the door and the windows, and each night it knew a little more. One more private thing. One more word only Tommy ever said. The nickname he had for me that I won't write down. And each night the ice got thicker and its voice got surer. The ice is good now, Cal. You can walk on it. Come see where I go. And each night I got closer to the door than the night before. The third night I was standing with my hand on the bar before I knew I'd crossed the room. I don't remember deciding to get up. I remember standing there with my palm on the cold oak of the bar, and Tommy's voice on the other side saying, there you are. There you are. I knew you'd come. Just lift it, Cal. Just lift it and come out on the ice with me. It's so much warmer out there than you think. And then it said the thing. It found the thing at last. It said soft through the door. I got you, Cal. Come on. I got you. Our words, the words nobody living knew. And something in my chest just folded, and my hand was lifting the bar. The bar was coming up out of the bracket, and what saved me, and I know how this sounds, what saved me was the drip. The drip in the ceiling started up behind me, plink, 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 water falling out of solid wood, and it was so wrong, so much the wrong way for water to be, that it snapped something back in me. And I let the bar drop into the bracket, and I backed away from the door with my hands out in front of me, like a man backing away from a ledge. And it hit the door then, hard once the whole lodge shook, and then it was quiet, and it didn't come back that night, and I didn't sleep, and I prayed the blink of the ceiling would keep going because it was the only wrong thing on that island that wanted me alive. The days between were their own long crawl. You'd think daylight would have been a full mercy, and it was a partial one. Whatever it was kept to the water and the dark and never came up onto the island in the day. But the days were when I had to keep myself alive and sane with almost nothing to do it with. I rationed the coffee because I was going through it too fast and there was only so much left in the tins, which for a man like me was its own small torture. I rationed the generator fuel because I had been burning every light I owned all night. I moved the couch so I couldn't lie there staring at the window with the frozen handprint fused to the glass. I kept my boots on, and I kept a screwdriver in each coat pocket without letting myself think too hard about why, though I'd known why since the DNR man first said the word crawl to me. Marie at the landing came on Channel 16 twice a day, morning and evening, whether I called or not. She'd key the mic and say, "You still with me, hun?" And I'd say I was, and she'd give me the ice report off the big lake and whatever the DNR was saying about reaching me, which for 3 of those days was nothing good, and she never once told me I was imagining things. I have thought since that Marie, an old woman I never met, in some cluttered office at the end of a gravel road, kept me alive as much as the men in the boat did, just by coming on twice a day and calling me hun and taking me at my word. On the worst afternoon, when I could feel myself starting to come apart the way Boyd's handwriting came apart, I told her a little of it, not all. Just that I kept hearing a voice at the door at night that I knew, and she was quiet a while, and then she said, "Whatever it sounds like, hun, it is not who it says it is. You remember that." It is not who it says it is. I wrote that down. I wrote it on the back page of the logbook under my own name, in block letters, "It is not who it says it is." And I read it in the bad hours, like a fence I'd built across the last page of Emmett Boyd's book. And under Boyd's last line, under the going out and the December date, I did one more foolish thing that I don't regret. I took his pen and I wrote, "No, I am not going out. Cal Renner." I meant it as hard as I have ever meant anything. It didn't feel like enough. Every night the voice took a little more of that fence down, one board at a time, one private word at a time, and I could feel the 4th night coming, and I did not think I would hold the 4th night. And I have wondered since if the only reason I did was that the ice finally got thick enough on the far channel for the boat to come, and it came on the 5th morning instead of a 6th, and a 6th would have been too late. They got me out on the morning of the 5th day. I heard it before I saw it, the way I'd heard the plane leave 2 months before, an engine out on the big lake, and I got out on the porch in the cold with my heart going, and there it was, coming up the far channel where the deep water still ran open on the Ontario side. A DNR boat, a big aluminum work boat, breaking the shore ice as it came. 2 men in orange float suits, and behind them the sun coming up red on the ice of the whole frozen bay. So the island sat in the middle of a sheet of pink glass. They couldn't get all the way in. The bay was solid ice a long way out, too thin to walk and too thick to break with the boat, and I understood I was going to have to do the one thing, the only thing, I had left on this earth. I was going to have to go out on the ice. They talked me through it on the radio. The one man had done ice rescue his whole life, and his voice was calm and flat, and I held on to it the way I'd held on to Rhonda's laugh. He told me where the ice was thickest, along the pressure ridge that had heaved up between the island and the deep water. He told me to lie down and spread out and crawl, not walk, to put myself flat so my weight went out across the ice instead of down through it, and to keep a screwdriver in each hand to claw myself out if I went in, and to not stop, no matter what, and to come to the sound of their engine and nothing else, no matter what I heard. Do you understand me, sir? Nothing else, only the engine. I crawled out onto Kettle Lake on my belly, with a screwdriver in each fist in the red morning light. The ice was clear as glass. That's the thing I dream about now. That's the thing that lives behind my eyes. Under me, through 2 inches of clear new ice, I could see straight down into the black water, feet of it, fathoms of it, the cold going down and down into the dark, and the ice groaned when I moved. It made that long singing wail sound ice makes when it's thin, and it flexed. I could feel it flex under my chest, like something breathing, and I kept my eyes on the DNR boat, and I crawled toward the engine. And Tommy came up under the ice. I felt him before I saw him, a cold that was different from the other cold. And I looked down. I couldn't not look down, and under me, under the clear ice, pacing me, keeping up with me as I crawled, there was a paleness, the shape of a boy, my brother, 10 years old, in the water, under the ice, looking up at me, his hands flat against the underside of the ice right below my hands, matching me, and his mouth moving, saying something I could hear even through the ice and the water, Tommy's voice in my head and my chest. "Don't go with him, Cal. Stay with me. You were supposed to stay with me." And the water didn't move him right either. Even then, even in the last of it, his hair drifted the wrong way, and the light came off his face wrong. And I knew it wasn't him. And I looked at the boat, and I kept my eyes on the boat, and I said out loud, crawling, I know I was. I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry. But you're not down there. You're not down there anymore. And the ice under me boomed, and a crack shot out white in every direction, and I heard the DNR man yell to move, move. And I clawed the last of it with the screwdrivers and hands, took my float suit collar and my arms, and hauled me up over the gunwale into the boat. And I lay in the bottom of it, on the cold metal, with the 2 men shouting, and the engine roaring, and the boat backing off the ice. And I did not look at the ice. And I have not looked at ice since. They flew me out from the landing that afternoon. They asked what happened out there, and I said the isolation got to me, that I'd stopped sleeping, that I'd let the window close and panicked. And they nodded, because that's the thing that happens. Men crack up alone, it frees up. It's in the safety pamphlet, and I let them write it that way. The DNR man who talked me across the ice looked at me a long moment while the paperwork got signed the way Mr. Keller had looked at me on the dock 2 months before, and he didn't ask me anything, and I didn't tell him anything. And just before I got in the truck, he said, "Low, not for the others. Boyd went out last December, off that same island. You know that?" And I said I'd read the logbook. He nodded. He said, "We never got him back. Cold like that deep. Sometimes they stay down." And then he said, and this is the thing I carry, he said, "It's a bad piece of water, that bay. Always has been. Ojibwe up here won't caretake it. It's only ever fellows from away." And he shook my hand, and I got in the truck. They never did find Emmett Boyd. I asked months later, and they never did. And I'll tell you the truth, I don't know what took me out on that porch to look at the window that night, and I don't know for certain what was under the ice with its hands against mine. And there's a doctor in town who has a whole clean explanation for all of it. Grief and cold and no sleep and a mind that makes what it needs to make. And some days I believe him. Most days. It's easier to believe him. I'm back in the apartment over the hardware. Rhonda comes by. She's patient with me in a way I still haven't earned. She knows something happened out there, and she doesn't push, and I love her a little for that, more than a little. She thinks I'll tell her someday. Maybe I will. But there's a thing about the apartment. The kitchen faucet drips. The landlord's been going to fix it for a year, and most nights it's nothing. It's a leaky faucet, and I sleep. But some nights, late, when the building's gone quiet and the colds come down and the pipes tick, the drip changes. It slows down. It gets deliberate. Plink. And then a long wait. And then plink. And then a longer wait, and I lie there in the dark over the hardware store 100 miles from any lake that matters. And I wait for the next one, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come. And I count, and right when I've decided it's stopped, right when I've let my breath out and started to believe it, it comes. blink, and I don't move. I lie there with my eyes open in the dark, and I don't move, and I listen for the sound under the sound, and I wait.